I want to take a quick moment to be grateful for all the support I've been receiving. You know what that means. Ah, let's go! This is literally insane, bro. Thank you, thank you, thank you. The support you got, don't worry, I'm good, almost died. The support you got showed from my last video was phenomenal. Timestamps will be all over this video, so don't feel afraid to skip. I won't feel bad if you do, that's up to you. Just a quick reminder that none of the placements on this tier list are based on my opinion. Sit back and grab something to eat, and let's talk some video games. Oh, and we're officially about to break a world record for action games in one subgenre on a tier list in a video about stylish action games, so stick around.
SP, part 1 is old. Release part 2 and fix it.
I've got a better idea. How about I release part 2 right now? Welcome to part 2.
We're going to get right into it, unlike last time where I explained how the ranking system works. The only thing we'll go over is that this tier list exists for the sole purpose of introducing you to new games and justifying how well it fits within the stylish action subgenre. Some call it character action games, some people call it spectacle fighters, but for the most part, people call it hack and slash. But why am I calling it stylish action? Because this list is ranking games based on how much you can experiment with the combat system and overall interactivity of the game. How complete is this game is the better question. That's what we're tackling, and we'll be poking holes in certain things and finding kinks in the armor. So here we go. I apologize for this in the last video, and I still feel very dirty for not having it included. Let's start with a game I sadly didn't add to the last tier list.
I've been having these weird thoughts lately. Like, is any of this for real or not?
Before I start, I want to add that maybe you're thinking, Kingdom Hearts is a game for kids. There's no reason to be as harsh as you were for the games you reviewed prior. With every genuine bone in my body, I'm here to tell you that Kingdom Hearts was not designed for children to play it. And the only way I can prove that to you is by suggesting you play it for yourself. I can guarantee that you will run into a predicament that the game throws at you where you'll say, there's no way Square Enix thought kids could beat this. The bosses in these games are extremely unbalanced. I've read stories of kids saying they passed the controller off to their mom because they couldn't beat certain sections. And as I explain in depth the nuances and hidden aspects of each game, you'll realize that maybe, just maybe, SP's words may actually hold some merit. Now, this has to be the toughest series to rank on this tier list because all Kingdom Hearts might end up being immune to review point 2. This already gives it a leg up on the other series included on the tier list by not being able to suffer the 0.25 point deduction due to the fact that all the games operate like they're a semi-open world. This average time of 28 hours to beat entry is pretty jam-packed with content, and I can see why a lot of people love this series. I'm typing this as I haven't experienced any of the other games in the series yet, but before I finish it, I like how the Disney characters aren't in your face like character reveal, haha, you see. I'm that one character from Disney that everyone knows about, which I find hilarious because the Final Fantasy characters come off that way. I need to look up and see how these characters were written and who wrote specific characters. It's almost as if they actually got the staff from these movies to assist with the script. In terms of combat, the game is very bare bones. You have a basic attack string and an air combo, but don't let that get your hopes up. The air combo is an automatic attack that Sora does in some cases, which is only triggered when his AI detects that an enemy is in an airborne state. Does it get more complex than this? No. There is tech that you can utilize for stagger and quicker frames, which I noticed while playing. You have deflect, which sometimes acts as a parry depending on the move used by the opponent, but the real meat and potatoes of this game, which separates it from its successors, is that it's mostly based on stats. So yes, this is one of those games where you farm and find secrets scattered across the world, so you can make the flashing red on the enemy's health bar look like a disoriented pregnancy test. So in other words, you gather skills that'll make your life 1,000 times easier. Kingdom Hearts, like many other Square Enix RPG games or titles like them, have a fixation with rewarding you for wasting your life by adding an extra 10 hours messing around, fighting secrets in the world you visit. A lot of this stuff isn't obvious. It's the type of stuff you'd only figure out if you watched a YouTube video about it 20 years later. A lot of "who would have figured that out" moments and Trust me, there are a lot of hidden overpowered abilities. So in other words, the casual experience of playing this game, unless you want to asparagus. So in other words, the casual experience of playing this game, unless you want to experiment, is mash X to win. But let's explain that too. You see this menu at the bottom left? It's a real-time menu which is controlled by the D-pad. The real-time menu defaults to attack. Kingdom Hearts treats itself as a real-time RPG, action RPG if you will. What makes it unique is that this menu at the bottom right is something that normally only appears in battle in a turn-based JRPG such as Final Fantasy, even though Final Fantasy treads that line as well since it's also a bit based in real time. I guess a more modern example to use that's probably more familiar is something like Octopath Traveler. When you need magic, you hit down on the D-pad. When you need an item, you hit down on the D-pad. When you need a summon, you hit down on the D-pad. Kingdom Hearts 1 is the foundation of the modern action RPG Square Enix makes today, but in a sense, it's just a prototype. As for personal thoughts, I didn't expect to get as attached to the story as much as I did. While I won't spoil anything for anyone that actually wants to experience these 9 games in its entirety, I did enjoy it, and I really wanted to see these kids succeed, but that's enough of that. I've done enough talking. I wanted to do a better job of explaining the mechanics of the games in these sections before the scoring, but I'll shut up now. Violations 5 and 7. 5. Does it have a mechanically complex combat system? Like I said earlier, there's no complexity at all. You confirm that you want to do a command with X on the command menu, and sit back and relax because this doesn't apply to all Kingdom Hearts games, surprisingly. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? Bosses are very cheap and unbalanced in this game to the point where you'll only find minor lapses in their attack patterns if you play the game 1,000 times over. You can tell that they're made to be unfair and only tolerable with the right setups. Sometimes things are based on luck, like praying that an enemy doesn't do a move when your magic is recovering, or praying they don't use a move so that you don't need a reason to deplete your magic. Bosses like Ursula, both phases, and Chernobog feel like perfecting some form of edging in video game form. But if I'm being serious, even though I was, it's like a battle of whittling the health bar down with the scraps you scrounge up off the ground. There's no way someone would know that they were going to be put in that position during a blind playthrough. Then it makes you wonder if Square Enix even had the thought that someone would revert their save and go back to farm for resources just to do 2 phases of an annoying boss that's not even fun to fight all over again. It's just something to think about. With all that being said, Kingdom Hearts scores a solid 8 out of 10.
It's my lucky charm. Be sure to bring it back to me.
Don't worry, I will.
I'd be surprised if Kingdom Hearts 3 matches this quality. Wait, I left a note here. Editor's note, I'm probably going to regret saying that, but I want to leave it in just for the laughs. Okay. The combo potential in this game is crazy. I see why they spread out the progression of unlocking more combo extenders so far into the game. The game does not care about your feelings, and that's something to appreciate in this subgenre. Much akin to the first game, but at least in Kingdom Hearts 2, it's very common for you to actually fight in one-on-one situations with humanoid characters as if you were on equal footing like the very last Riku fight. We need to be tested and told that we have to find solutions for these problems through trial and error. The optional bosses destroyed me due to not being leveled up enough, and I plan on going back to beat them, but Kingdom Hearts 2 is a roller coaster of emotions, and I was finally glad to see that ending after working so hard to get it. It's a definitive upgrade to Kingdom Hearts 1, and with the drive system, it allows for a lot of creativity with the combos and offers a different playstyle with each. I can honestly say that I had a lot of fun with this one, and despite me taking my time with it, I still completed it in the average time, which surprised me. It makes me upset that the younger me thought this was some kids game that would have sucked because it had Disney characters in it. I was completely wrong. I wish I had played this sooner, and it's going to be entangled in my memory for a long time. The only thing I would spoil for anyone who's playing this game, even though I know I said I wouldn't, and isn't crunched on time like I was, make sure to level up your drive forms. The game does a terrible job of explaining how to level them up. Actually, scratch that. The game doesn't even tell you how to, nor even makes it apparent that it's possible. Once you level up these drive forms, you're basically on an equal playing field with the bosses. There's some maps that will change your anatomy and make drive forms a non-factor in combat, but it's not that much of a downside, since we can make an argument that temporarily taking them away at times allows for a different playstyle and approach in enemy encounters. This game has a unique mechanic that was pretty fun called reaction commands. It may seem gimmicky, but the game will offer you the opportunity to find a kink in the enemy's armor or animations to press triangle and get them into a punishing attack that gives you iframes to abuse in a way to remain more offensive as opposed to defensive. But defense is extremely important in this game though. You'll find yourself looking for the perfect frame to block and keeping your eyes open for one of those death combos the kids talk about nowadays. And trust me, the bosses across this entire series tend to have a lot. They even have a passive skill that we can equip that allows us to avoid death as long as we're over 1 HP. They are very aware of how hard and unbalanced their games are. Are you starting to see why I said in the beginning, this game was not designed for kids? So back to the utilization of the real-time menu. The real-time menu is a lot more interactive in Kingdom Hearts 2 than in the other games. You can be trapped by an enemy, which in turn, you'll have to wait for the perfect moment when a prompt on the menu appears. During a boss fight, the game will trick you into thinking nothing is going to happen. Then suddenly something will pop up, but there's way more secrets involved. Sometimes, if you click the prompt at the right time, you do more damage or less. Sometimes you have to wait and do more damage. There will be times when your moveset can change and you'll steal someone's weapon. And that's just small stuff. Unlike the first game, the entirety of Kingdom Hearts 2's combat is completely based around navigating the real-time menu with efficiency. To do something stylish or bordering on the idea of bullying your enemies, you'll need to know where you're going and what you're looking for. Of course, the game offers you shortcuts, which helps with certain things, but that's only half the battle. We're here to talk about stylish action games. This is where the drive forms come into play. We have Veiler form, Wisdom form, Limit form, Master form, and Final form. And for anyone who has played Kingdom Hearts 2 and knows about the form I obfuscated, hold your horses. We'll get to that one. All of these forms are extremely tedious to level up, and it kind of sucks because not only does Square Enix not tell us how to level them up, they're a pain in the tuchus to get to max level. All of these forms have their own combo extending abilities. Each of them actually has their own moveset and quirks. Now, what about the other form I didn't mention? Well, let me introduce you to Anti-form. The explanation for this transformation is actually tough, but I can't say it because I don't want to spoil the story. But they went leaps and bounds beyond with Kingdom Hearts 2 because Anti-form is a secret form that you will only experience if you consistently use the drive forms within battle. This is the coolest mechanic, but it's actually really annoying. It's based on an invisible value that the game never explains, just like the concept of leveling drive forms itself. So each time you transform, your anti-value goes up. And since there's no visual indicator as to how much value the forms add to contribute to the anti-value, you're like a deer in the headlights waiting for the inevitable to happen. But why did I use that analogy? As cool as anti-form is, it's a huge detriment while in battles. You lose all defensive capabilities, your magic is locked, and all you have to Sora's name is the attack button. You can de-transform out of every single drive form aside from anti-form. You have to wait out the entirety of the transformation. The only thing anti-form makes up for is that it has the dopest attack animations in gaming history. But that's basically it. You become an offensive glass cannon. You can juggle and experiment like crazy in this game with all the things I just listed. And with that being said, Kingdom Hearts 2 is probably one of my favorite gaming experiences. I really love how the story ended in this one. Those kids went off at the end. That was such an early 2000s ending to a game, bro. No violations. Kingdom Hearts 2 is a very late entry in the tier list that gets a perfect score 10 out of 10.
Woo! Whose side are you on? I just got slugged.
Want some more?
So as I play Kingdom Hearts, I'm 100% getting into the story more than I originally thought I would. I'm not spoiling all of the stuff that goes on in between, but I'll admit that 358 over 2 days was a wild ride. Yeah, I enjoyed the time I spent with it, but I won't deny it being a drawn out experience. That's a recurring theme with Kingdom Hearts games. They're very rinse and repeat, leaving the task you're required to do feeling monotonous at times, like you're going through the motions of a redundant journey. Even still, with that in mind, you'll find ways to experiment, which the game wants you to do. As I play each newer title, I begin to realize just how much of an RPG Kingdom Hearts is behind the action. It puts the A in ARPG and wears it pretty nicely like the local neighborhood boy wearing the baggiest skinny jeans in Atlanta. So once you finally settled into the Nut Hugger 5000s, you're slowly met with trials that you may not be ready for. Then ask yourself, what can I do to make this easier on myself? There's a variety of spells, abilities, sometimes enemy weaknesses you may not know about. The game rewards you for playing it. I guess my only personal gripe, despite it being an RPG, which is to be expected, is that the game doesn't reward you early enough. If you want to do the cool stuff or get the really overpowered abilities, you'll have to get near the end of the game, which kinda sucks. To put this into perspective, and hopefully I'm not wrong about this, I took a break from writing the script, but I was actually still playing games and scoring them. I wasn't slacking off by any means. So to put this into perspective, there's 93 missions in 358 over 2 days. You'll probably start getting the real OP abilities after you've gotten to mission 78. That's kind of ridiculous. And the entire series has a habit of nickel and diming you until you get near the end. One thing I'll also add after my 4-month break from Kingdom Hearts, and no, I played this before the break, I just didn't write the script yet, is that the series also has this unnecessary mechanic it gives to bosses where they can death combo you from a simple touch. Quite often, you'll get staggered, and if the boss has an active hit string that you're caught in the middle of, you're dead. It doesn't matter how much HP you have. I don't remember if I said this earlier, but I'll go read it after this statement. This game is clearly not made for kids, and oh yeah, okay, I did say that. Which part of the script did I write first? It makes me wonder how Disney allowed Square Enix to get away with some of the design decisions, but it's possible they didn't care as long as it prints papers. So before I get to the scoring, I want to address something. I said that anything with a semi-open world is immune to Rule 2. 358 over 2 days is actually the first Kingdom Hearts game to have another mode, so now I'm thinking that I should add a review point to make things a bit more fun. What if I added a rule that if something with a semi-open world has another mode, it gains 0.25 points? Just food for thought. I'm probably not going to do it though. Violation 5. 5. Does it have a mechanically complex combat system? No. The game is basically this grid where you put moves that are available to fit into a space if the game allows you the space. It's a very magic reliant game. There's not much to speak about. 6. Is the gameplay based around a gimmick? So the game wants everything you do to be based around this panel system? Is that what it's called? I'm not fact checking it. It's almost 2 a.m. as I'm writing this. Leave me alone! The game doesn't really allow you to operate freely. It's dependent on if you've earned enough space in these panels to create different combinations to make yourself stronger. The game also makes it so that certain abilities are limited to how many times you can fit them in the panels. I'm done. Moving on. Had to go back and fix this. The score is a solid 8.5.
So, you got the number memorized, do you?
Oh my god, this is going to be so long-winded. Okay, Birth by Sleep is a game I enjoyed. It was an extremely repetitive experience, and I won't deny that. The amount of experimentation the game allowed that is also never elaborated on, probably, which is a personal gripe. I understand they do that because they want you to discover stuff on your own, was actually rewarding. So rewarding, in fact, that the game actually wants you to secretly do that. In games like these where they introduce mechanics that you'll probably write off, it turns out that they're actually important. Go figure. I should have learned my lesson from the last 4 games I played. And yes, I played through Rechains of Memories and went through that experience, so I do a lot for this channel. Even go as far as to get immersed for your viewing pleasure. Back to the point I was making about experimentation. Birth by Sleep introduces something new to the series with a twist, which is clearly inspired by the game I'm not covering on this tier list because it has nothing to do with this subgenre. Rechain of Memories has these things called sleights, which are created after combining 3 cards together with a number attached to them that equals a specific number. So say you unlocked a new ability and the value to perform the attack is 21. So you'll find attack cards with a value of 7, 7, and 7. To make your life easier if you know simple math, you don't specifically need all 7s, just numbers that equal 21. And your character will be jumping across the screen hitting the boss with whatever as long as the sleight value used is bigger than the enemy's / boss's sleight. How Birth by Sleep changes this is you'll get abilities and unlock them over time, but you have to find them or create them from scratch. Some moves from Rechain of Memories return in Birth by Sleep. So the point is, to create as many of these moves as possible to fit inside your deck. Some take up more space than the other, but there's a reason for that. Just like Rechain of Memories, there are extremely OP abilities that you can craft that make the boss or enemies in general a non-threat. Square Enix knows this, and the more you play and mess around with these decks in either game, the more you realize just how intentional and integral to the gameplay these abilities were made to be. The first character I chose was Terra. I played the game in the recommended order that was shown. All of that stuff I just told you went over my head and I struggled on the last boss fight because I didn't learn any of this. When I was messing around with Ventus's kit, something clicked in me. So I decided to look some stuff up in the middle of my playthrough. And lo and behold, that entire system that a spark in my brain got curious about was much deeper than I originally thought. After I played Terra, I spent about 3 hours farming for Ventus and Aqua individually. I didn't record my playthrough, but I even managed to get an ability with a 5% chance of being crafted by accident. You wouldn't believe why that kind of pissed me off. Ready? So I spent an hour researching and finding out how to get an ability as Aqua. I had an extremely bad deck with her. My damage was really bad since she's not a melee focused character, something I noticed quite early when I started playing her. I got the ability and went to my favorite farming spot. I bought everything I needed because I finally unlocked most of the stuff that was integral to getting my setup. So I spent an hour farming and leveling up everything because it was mandatory to create abilities. You have to level up an ability to get a new one or combine it with others to create stronger abilities. So what happens? My 5% chance propped and I didn't get the ability I actually wanted. I had a 95% chance of success and got one of the rarest moves in the game instead. Why did that piss me off? Because while I got something rare, I had to farm for another hour. I enjoyed the game though. Before I get to the score, I wanted to add this long-winded part because I want you guys to understand that I'm actually playing these games and not just talking about them. I would never do that to you. Another thing that was introduced in Birth by Sleep is shot locks. You hold the right bumper down and hold it. As you hold it in focus, oh, that's why they call it that. You hold it down and focus your aim within a circle that pops up, and once it reaches 30, I think it's 30, you release a special move that uses up your focus meter. And there's a variety of shot locks. They're pretty OP. I admittedly didn't try them all out. One last thing that Birth by Sleep introduces is drives. Depending on the nature of the abilities you use in succession, you'll be able to go into a new form that changes up your moveset. It's actually reminiscent of Kingdom Hearts 2, obviously, but it's not the same thing. If it weren't for the fact that this game had a lack of invincibility frames, these forms would actually be useful against bosses. With that being said, Violation 5. 5. Does it have a mechanically complex combat system? No. Despite the combat falling a bit short, the thing I find funny about the KH series is that the gameplay loop resembles that of a stylish action game. You play the level and fight the big bad at the end. Maybe they'll have multiple phases, maybe they won't. What is for certain is that Birth by Sleep fell short in comparison to Kingdom Hearts 2. It became a waiting game of choosing the proper OP deck abilities and spamming them as fast as possible while you wait for them to reload, to then use it again once you notice the boss doing that one attack that'll have you saying, "You're third rank duelist with a fourth rank deck, prepare for my ultimate attack."
Fire!
See for yourself all the powers of hell!
If I had to say which Kingdom Hearts game has the second best combat, it'd be Recoded. It takes a page from Birth by Sleep with the way it implements the command deck. The mobile titles have a real fixation with decks. You use the move and you gotta wait for it to come back. But the way that Recoded supersedes Birth by Sleep with the way it had implemented the command deck is by allowing your moves to freely flow into each other. There's multiple combinations that you can make for a seamless combat flow. As for the enemies and bosses and the way they're implemented, they're pretty annoying. You probably won't have fun with it, but I don't want to dictate your experience. Obviously, play for yourself and come to your own conclusions. My conclusion after playing the game is that the bosses were a bit overtuned and RNG hellish. And to the person who had the Hollow Bastion level idea where it takes away all of your abilities and advocates you replacing moves in your deck only for it to throw you into a boss fight without a save point for 2 hours, I hope you have a loving wife and family. Kingdom Hearts has a tendency to throw unnecessarily annoying things at you for no reason and they think it's justifiable. Combat wise, the game is enjoyable, so I won't harp on it. If you like doing tests or making combat videos or combat mads, those things that we like watching in this space, Recoded is surprisingly up your alley. That's what we're here for. Violation 7 and 16. 7. Does it have enticing enemies in boss fights which test your skills? Near the end is where the bosses start testing your metal instead of your patience, so I won't take full points off for this one. 16. Does the game lack enemy variety? Recoded recycles so many enemies and bosses from prior titles that it's not even funny. That leaves Recoded at a solid 9.25.
Mickey, it's Riku. They put bugs in him. What?
Dream drop distance. I'll say this again. I'm not here to spoil the story, but I will say vague things like you get to play Sora and Riku in this game, which is cool. Now that I'm thinking about it, I don't think I brought up any of the kids' names until now. There's not really much to say about this one. If you play Birth by Sleep, then you know exactly what to expect in this game. The only difference is that every single overpowered move isn't locked behind combining abilities to create new abilities. This time, you have to collect Pokemon and work a 9 to 5 until retirement age so that you can collect Social Security. What is this Social Security in lore? Well, if you level up the aforementioned Pokemon, you'll be given new abilities that you have to unlock with an in-game currency tied to killing enemies. After you use Darkrai, Diamond, or Pearl, which you unlock later in the game, you get broken abilities that'll give your enemy an ouchie. Leveling these things up is so tedious and annoying that people have found so many exploits to level them up and get their overpowered abilities faster or way sooner than you're supposed to in early game. It's not fun, because when you take the time out of your day to think about what the world would look like if Dream Drop Distance didn't have exploits, it would look like this. Sorry about that. The fact that Square Enix believed that someone in this world wanted to sit on their bare behind all day, yes, I know you're naked, farming like they have absolutely nothing to do is crazy. But then again, after the past year, I realized that they designed all of their games like that. We can trace that back to the drive forms. If I showed you the math and how long it would take to get all of these Pokemon leveled up if you did it without exploits, you'd probably agree. But I don't feel like doing that math. So can you just take my word that it would be a timely effort? The entire game is based around these things. The Pokemon are called Dream Eaters, by the way. Love the ending though. As for the gameplay, the flow motion that they introduced into this game was janky, but it was cool. It took a bit of time to get used to. It felt a bit unresponsive at times, but I still managed to get the job done, so I can't complain. The bosses at the very end should have been introduced with the logo for Rated E for everyone and slowly faded to A for adults to fully give off the immersion that you're about to get molested. Because why? I think I beat the final two on the first try, but still, leave a young entrepreneur alone. And I know I said no spoilers, but please let me get this off my chest. So Sora and Riku are sent into a dream world for a test, and if they pass, they'll be labeled Keyblade Masters. So the way to actually pass the test is by unlocking the power of Awakening, which is an ability that's vital to have as a Keyblade wielder. So the only reason why Sora and Riku even got the opportunity to use the power of Awakening is due to the interference of the main villains in the dream, who Yen Sid, the guy who sent them into the dream world, had no idea that they were intervened. So without the influence of the villains, how would either of them have passed the test if the very specific circumstance that was created wouldn't have reared its ugly head if it's that specific? It's the equivalent of you sending me into another world to pass the test without any direction on what to do, but in order to pass the test, I have to cure a disease that less than 0.1% of the population has. Then somebody interferes with the other world I'm sent into, then suddenly that disease is in the world. But if the guy who sent me there never planned that, doesn't that mean I just got lucky that some asshole came in and gave me the solution? Anyways, this game introduces Dream Eaters, which are technically reintroduced later in Kingdom Hearts 3, but we'll get there. Violations 5, 6, and 7. 5. Does it have a mechanically complex combat system? Nope. You tap a button and the magic happens. 6. Is the gameplay based around a gimmick? Yes, leveling up the Pokemon. 7. Does it have enticing enemies in boss fights which test your skills? They don't test your skill, but they are fairly hardy to deal with by the end. That leaves Dream Drop Distance at a 7.5.
Are you gonna be okay?
Yeah, I won't be long.
Kingdom Hearts 0.2 Birth by Sleep, a Fragmentary Passage. That is a mouthful. I'm actually not going to waste my time discussing this one in depth, since everything that's in Kingdom Hearts 3 is in this game. It seems like a waste of time when we could just talk about how Kingdom Hearts 3 is a culmination of all the things presented in the series so far. This is the very first Kingdom Hearts game that isn't immune to Violation 2. Finally! Violations 2, 4, 5, 7, and 16. We're not taking full points on 7 though. Kingdom Hearts 0.2 Birth by Sleep, a Fragmentary Passage scores a 7.75. Like, I really had to say all that, bro.
How did you find me?
I looked here and heard you in the darkness.
Kingdom Hearts 3. I want to get this out of the way before I state anything about the game's mechanics. As I'm typing this down, I'm officially done with the entire Kingdom Hearts series. I enjoyed my time, but I'm not going to hold my tongue on this one. I feel like saying my piece is a good send-off, even though the point of these videos is to converse with you guys about gameplay mechanics. The ending to this game felt bitter. I feel like Square Enix needs to strike a deal with Disney to let the Disney characters take up less screen time in order to develop the actual story. By hour 19 or 20, you'll probably be done with the Disney worlds, but then there's only 6 to 7 hours left to wrap up all the plot threads that people have been waiting over 20 years for. Most of that is taken up by cutscenes, which take up too much of the overall playtime of the game itself. The cutscenes get to the point where they border around almost an hour at times. I remember I wanted to go to sleep and I was done for the night, and a cutscene played for like an hour, and I was basically forced to watch it because I didn't want to miss the story and I wanted to understand what was going on. Imagine my frustration when they threw me into a boss fight as the cutscene ended. I was pissed. But from a writing perspective, to build all of that up through 8 games only to hand fist and rush every single bit of closure that the fans wanted within 6 to 7 hours was extremely poorly handled. You don't do that. We don't do fan service for the sake of fan service. Nobody wins at the end of the day, because even when people fall for the generated hype, they were still treated like 5-year-olds. You're then telling them that that's okay to do in writing. You unravel things bit by bit in a manner that involves characters solving the problem in a methodical or meticulous way that isn't executed in a fashion that feels like everything was handed to the main cast on a silver platter for convenience sake. Everything that they wanted or needed to be in place to give themselves closure was just right there in front of them in the final battle. It'll make you ask, then why didn't you just do that in the first place if that was the solution? It didn't make me upset, but it made me solidify this opinion of mine even more. I personally think Nomura needs to strike a deal with Disney to give more time to the original characters while cutting the Disney worlds out. They don't have enough time to develop. Of course, there's a balance that you can find like in KH1 and KH2, but if we're going to end up getting stuff like that, then the story is going to suffer. From what it seems like, going by the trailer, Kingdom Hearts 4 seems like it may be more focused on the original characters, but that's only speculation on my part. They have a new fan, and I just want the best for the series. No hate here, just a passionate critique. Now, as for the gameplay, it's very much like Kingdom Hearts 2, but after going to sleep and having time to sit on my thoughts, I started noticing some cracks. Aside from Square Enix huffing enamel when crafting the final batch of boss fights, there is something oddly casual about this game. But listen, I'm not ignorant. I understand that casual play is an appeal. It can trick a normie into thinking that they're actually being good at the game, because like most people, I'm not included in this by the way, do not test me, they want to feel like they're thrown into a realistic VR simulation with a grizzly bear. They want to feel like they can win against the grizzly bear, so what better way than to give the audience basic tools to take down a grizzly bear? Square Enix thought it was a good idea to give you an AR-15 that doesn't stop shooting, so what does Sora do? After you're done attacking, you can just keep pressing X and he'll stay in the air while he keeps hitting the enemy. Nothing like KH2 where he hits the enemy in an air combo, then is reset to a ground position after the initial combo is finished. It's less of a reset and more of a timer, but you can still continue hitting in the air after a bit of time has passed in KH2. And KH3, just keep pressing X to attack. They really dumbed this one down. Now, let's talk about some mechanics that have actually returned. Let me leave this in because I'm now realizing I have to go back and explain command styles in the Birth by Sleep section, though it would be funny to leave this in because you'll be hearing evidence of time traveling while I'm operating in real time. So, command styles! This mechanic sort of returns in KH3 with A bit of research, people don't exactly know how these triangle things work. From my personal experience, it's every time you finish a combo. Once you perform 3, a command style will appear, but it's not entirely dependent on the type of abilities or spells you use, it's also affected by whatever keyblade you have equipped. This is KH3's replacement for drive forms. They don't take magic and they run on a timer. Some of these transformations actually have second forms that operate on the same rules. Land 3 combos, then you get to go into a second form. Most of these give you an ultimate attack to use after you've done 3 combos. Others only allow the ultimate attack after you've done the second transformation. In these drive forms, your attack animations actually change. You can also cancel attack animations and combo into them. The initial animation where you go into the drive form is actually an attack as well. Shot locks also return, and like Birth by Sleep, there's multiple. The only difference is that the shot locks that you're given are tethered to the keyblade you're using. You can actually use these to extend combos if you wanna. This is also the first game where you can upgrade your keyblades as well. KH3 is the full package, but not everything operates the same. Summons return, you have magic, shot locks, drive forms, and even anti-form. Anti-form works differently in KH3. This time, it's called Rage Form. You have the opportunity to go into Rage Form whenever you're getting beat within an inch of your life. In my opinion, it's not as cool or mysterious as Anti-Form from KH2. They made it like it's some sort of demon form that can be accessed at all times, technically speaking. Kind of cringy if you ask me. This section has lasted long enough, so let's get to the ranking section and finish Kingdom Hearts. Violations 5 and 7. 5. Does it have a mechanically complex combat system? No. The reason why this one falls short is because it's less methodical than how it's handled in KH2. KH3 is more of an ease of access game due to the shot locks and overabundance of tools. When you tried to do a combo in KH2, you actually felt like there was a learning curve. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? By the end of the game, the bosses start to test your ability as a player, but for the most part, yes and no. We'll take half points off for this one. If most of the bosses were like Yozora in the DLC and not just a hodgepodge of 3 people at a time with death combo moves, then sure, maybe I wouldn't take points off for this. This scores Kingdom Hearts 3 a solid 8.5 and officially ends the Kingdom Hearts section of the tier list.
The name's Chirithy, and this is the final world.
I'm Sora. What's the final world?
Altered Beast. Since there's a lot to talk about for this game, I'll keep it short. The video is also getting really long, so I had to simmer some of these reviews down. You turn into these animals, but the catch is that you run out of energy while in the forms. You can gain energy back through kills, but once your energy reaches 0, you'll start losing HP until you inevitably die. There's 8 transformations if I can recall correctly. They all have their different uses. Oftentimes it feels like the game leaves you little time to experiment with anything since it's like a race against the clock with how fast your beast form depletes in energy. Violations 5, 6, and 7. 5. Does it have a mechanically complex combat system? No, but I did figure out some sauce with the juggle. 6. Is the gameplay based around a gimmick? That meter thing I mentioned earlier, imagine Devil Trigger, but you have to keep killing to keep it up constantly. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? The regular enemies kind of bombard you to the point where they'll stun lock you for 25% HP. The bosses are all gimmicky. This scores Altered Beast to 7.5 out of 10. Berserk, Millennium, Falcon, and Seima Senko no Show. Long title. Anywho, I enjoyed the game. It had a surprising amount of depth to it despite the year it came out. I guess developers weren't afraid to actually give characters fleshed out movesets back then. I mean, obviously, but even the tutorial took forever to get out of. It's very unforgiving, and it should be. If you know anything about Berserk, it should be impossible to take on all of the demons Guts does, but that's what makes him so impressive as a person. Playing it isn't anything like reading it, which has already been done, of course. I love Berserk, and rest in peace to Kentaro Miura. Violations 5 and 7. 5. Does it have a mechanically complex combat system? You'll be pressing square, square, square for the majority of this game. It does have some mechanics that surprise me. Berserk mode, which is like Devil Trigger, multiple counterattacks, a lock-on system, the 3 dodge rule, making it the first game to have it chronologically since Oogie's Revenge came out 14 days after, and Dismemberment before Ninja Gaiden 2 had it. It's cool going back in time and seeing which games did what first. Despite all of this, there's nothing crazy to pull off. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? The bosses are the only real saving grace of this game, but they're so sparse that it's hard to give it any credit. They're fun to fight, but when it just becomes make sure you counterattack at the right time, it kind of takes away the need to be skillful. The enemies are kind of cheap and spawn in abundance when they can be cleaved in two without much effort. This scores Berserk, Millennium, Falcon, and Seima Denki no show a solid 8 out of 10. Blood Will Tell, or Dororo if you know about that. This game is pretty long. Excuse my lack of gameplay, I forgot to record again. It could be a trudge at times because you don't necessarily have to engage with the combat system unless the game forces something on you. A lot of the correct ways to approach things is a jump attack or jumping over something. Enjoyable to play, nonetheless. It's definitely a game I would have loved as a kid and not beat because I got stuck on something. I swear my first playthrough in Ninja Gaiden changed how I gripped the controller forever. Violations 5 and 7. 5. Does it have a mechanically complex combat system? It has a lot of button combinations, but nothing where it would lead into a bunch of air juggle states. A lot of jump attacks and pacing. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? A lot of them can be very cheap and gimmicky. Then there's the other batch that are just wholehearted pushovers. This scores Blood Will Tell a solid 8 out of 10.
To help him accomplish this, Jukai decided to perform one final operation on Hyakimaru.
Blood plus Souyoku no Battle Rondo. What a mouthful. Fun fact, I actually watched like 4 episodes of this back then. I have to admit that I can't read kanji, so I could not for the life of me tell you what this game was trying to convey to me about its control scheme. So I'll just put someone else playing it. I like the fact that you can play 2 characters and the combat is on the basic side. The combat is cool going by what I see from the people who can actually read what it tells you to do. That's my only personal note. Violations 4, 5, 7, 8, and 16. 4. Does it have interesting level designs? There really isn't any type of level design, to be honest. It's just an arena. 5. Does it have a mechanically complex combat system? Cool and responsive combat system, lack of depth. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? So I'll take half points because I'll admit that the enemies do fight back. The only issue is that most of them share the exact same animation, so they end up becoming predictable. 8. Is the game littered with too many QuickTime events? I'm taking half points for this one. This is literally the rarest thing on the tier list aside from 18 to get a violation for. This is more of a warning to anyone who'd like to try this game. There will be forced QuickTime event sections that they'll throw at you during unskippable cutscenes. Why is this a problem? They're the most useless QuickTime events that add nothing to the gameplay. For crying out loud, they had me do a QuickTime event for someone walking up the stairs. I mean, come on, man. 16. Does the game lack enemy variety? Most definitely. This scores, I really have to say this again, this scores Blood plus Souyoku no Battle Rondo a 6 out of 10.
その歌のような耳鳴りはどこから聞こえるかわかる? かすかに.
Buccaneer 2006. Not to be confused with Pirates, Legend of the Black Buccaneer. This game is apparently like Zombie Zone. It was just a random project. Granted, it didn't turn into anything, but the combat is solid for the most part. It's kind of hard to rank that aspect of it when combat is basically all the game has. It's like an indie game on the PS2. Then again, weren't there super generous publishers back then that had just put anything on a console? I mean, you know what? D3 Publishers has a buttload of games pushed to the masses that no one plays, so it makes sense knowing they're behind it. Let's get to the review points. 2. Does the game have other modes? I don't believe so. 4. Does it have interesting level designs? There's nothing interesting that happens in them. You get thrown into an arena and you have to fight people. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? The enemies and bosses can be easily danced around. 16. Does the game lack enemy variety? I'm inclined to say yes. This scores Buccaneer a solid 8.25 out of 10 despite it not being a complete package. Bujingai Forsaken City. Personal opinion out of the way, this game was flames, but frustrating. Especially stage 7! Ah! Stage 7 almost made me lose my mind. But for a 2003 action game that predates the 3D Ninja Gaiden series by a couple of months, it was actually really good. Some combat encounters can be a bit overwhelming, but there's always an answer to it if you pay attention. Unlike the Dragon Boss, my God! I hope you have a loving wife and family. Developer son! For a 2003 game that's also not DMC, the combat was fairly fun and deep, aside from me not being a fan of the inverted controls on the camera. It has a parry system where you can deflect beams and stuff, and if I'm not mistaken, I think this is the first action game that has combat based around dance, since that's heavily a part of Wuxia. There's another Wuxia game coming up on the tier list, but it most definitely doesn't follow the corny aspect of it that makes Wuxia cool, like Bujingai. Like, when I played it, I didn't feel like it had Shaolin soccer vibes, if you've ever watched that movie. It incorporated the whole theatrics of it into the game, and I thought that it was really well implemented. It was just as cheesy and everything. Perfect. Perfect. Just like real Wuxia. Violations 2, 6, and 16. 2. Does the game have other modes? Nope. 6. Is the gameplay based around a gimmick? It's actually the whole Wuxia thing I was talking about, so you'll basically be locked into an engagement where you guys will Wuxia fight, and you have to make the best guess as to how to approach the enemy. That's how you get a big chunk of your damage, even though a lot of it at times is based on your spacing and how you carry out the interaction. 16. Does the game lack enemy variety? Yep, the enemy count peaks fairly early. The game scores a solid 9.25, which is really good.
We can rescue her. I knew my best friend wouldn't let me down. Together, we make a deadly combination.
Castlevania Lament of Innocence isn't a bad game by any means. A lot of secrets in each labyrinth. It can get a bit tiring exploring each floor, but the boss fights are pretty worth it. That golem thing, the doppelganger, and the succubus were pretty good. I think it's nice having a game that actually tests your reflexes and makes you use the mechanics of the game at the same time. Where some of the bosses gimmicky, yeah, but not enough to the point where the game doesn't demand you to fight for it while focusing on the other aspects. Maybe it'll have an attack string, maybe it'll have something you should avoid, maybe it'll have projectiles or some gimmick you should look out for just in case, an attack variation, a second phase, status effects that you should avoid, or a ground pound move. This all sounds annoying to deal with, but it's honestly not. There's enough room and telegraph stuff for the player to understand that they're making a mistake or the boss is leaving you with a momentary opportunity to capitalize on. For an action game that came out after DMC 1, it didn't do a bad job. Violations 2 and 5. 2. Does the game have other modes? Nope. 5. Does it have a mechanically complex combat system? I would say no. There's moves you can use to juggle, but not as in depth as you would think. Very short combinations that possibly lead into other things. It also has infinites, but just because you can stun lock an enemy to death doesn't constitute depth. That's just cheesing. This scores Castlevania Lament of Innocence a solid 8.75 out of 10.
Who's there? Now don't get so excited. I'm just an old man.
I want everyone to understand that this video is getting extremely long, so I'll be saving myself some time by just saying Lament of Innocence and Curse of Darkness are basically identical, so same score.
Come to exact my revenge upon you for the death of Rosalie! Oh.
Chaos Legion. Okay, so I want to get this off my chest. We all know our experiences with a game isn't universal. Someone else will feel one way about it and you'll feel another. So let me express how I felt playing Chaos Legion. I want to be very careful with how I word things in this section because I understand that there's actually an abundance of people who have played Chaos Legion and enjoyed it. And I don't want to make them upset. I don't want to be unfair, nor do I want to mince my words, but I really do think that the community who does appreciate it lets this game get away with way more than it should from a game design standpoint. Do I think the game was good? I think it's unbalanced and throws a lot at you and expects you to understand what's going on while having everything present at once to be a possible hindrance to you in every single level, all while doing its best to make all sections unplayable. The worst part is that you can replay stages but only after you beat stage 9. The game keeps you from replaying stages in an action RPG where you have to level up your legions to make them more powerful. On top of the fact that you can only bring in 2 legions at a time, and the stage can be tailored more to one Legion, and if you pick the wrong one, you're stuck with it until the end. And even when a stage has a recommended Legion, it's actually stupid to bring them along for the mission, because remember how I said it's an action RPG? Once you finally unlock the new Legion, you have to level it up, but enemies get stronger as time goes on as you get to each level. So once you get the new Legion, they're useless for the stage where they're the most useful. But now you're probably asking, and I know you are because this game only sold like 300k copies, but now you're asking, since it's an action RPG, wouldn't it make more sense to just bring the Legion into the level to level them up? Well, that's not a good idea because they become a liability and they don't level up in real time. You're only allowed to level up Legions after you complete a stage. The bosses are relentless and do things that you won't be prepared for on first encounters, which is fine. Like, all bosses usually do that in these old games. I'm not like really harping on that, but they'll just kill you. And once you die, if you want to restart from a checkpoint, it takes away some XP you collected. Like, no matter how I explain anything about this game, the entirety of every single encounter is made to kick you in the face. And honestly, it just feels like the developers are laughing at you. Like, they shrunk you down and threw you into a miniature circus. It feels like I'm being constantly laughed at. I'm not trying to be mean. I'm not trying to be funny. And I know I undercut stuff with a joke or some screaming, but this is me being 100% serious. And the whole game is basically destroy this demon spawner to progress. It gets old. And I could get over that if it weren't for the fact that every single thing was just made to get on your nerves, to hinder you in some shape or form. I can't, for the life of me, understand how somebody can defend the way the game is designed. And I'm just strictly coming at the game's design. The combat and all the possibilities are cool. And once you get past stage 9 and can replay all the levels to experiment, it's fine. But the trudge to get there isn't worth it. There's a gem hidden somewhere in the game and is buried underneath a continent of oversaturated annoyances and unfairness. And this sold 300k? For an obscure game with cool cover art, I can see why now. The team behind this earned it. Violations 2, 4, 6, 7, and 18. 2. Does the game have other modes? No. 4. Does it have interesting level designs? Every level is basically kill the demon spawner to move on while being bombarded by infinitely spawning demons who are relentless as they put something annoying by the demon spawner that's almost impossible to dodge. 6. Is the gameplay based around a gimmick? The Legions. You have to level them up, but they're a liability since the game sort of forces you to stick with your best ones instead of the ones that are best for the job. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? All the enemies are gimmicky in some fashion. The bosses specifically, you have to play so perfectly against them that it makes you wonder if the game was even QA tested. 18. Is the game littered with fetch quests and lazy quest design? Like I said before, kill the demon spawner and move to the next area is basically the entire game. Chaos Legion scores a 7 out of 10. I ran out of music.
It looks like he's headed for the ruins of Murdoa. Do you know him?
You shouldn't concern yourself with that.
Genji Dawn of the Samurai. I was genuinely surprised at the overall feel of the combat system. It's hard to explain, but the best way I can put it is that when something goes wrong, it feels like it's my fault. Despite the combat being simple, it was fun. There's a basic launcher, air combo, stinger, and helm splitter, and yes, the stinger and launchers are the exact same commands as in Devil May Cry. So let's talk about the interesting mechanic that sets this game apart from the others. This game has a special ability that's integral to Master, which is like Innocence from Onimusha and Intercepts from Ninja Gaiden. Kamui is triggered by L1, and when you tap it, the entire field turns blue and stuff. Once the field turns blue, enemies will take a one-on-one dueling stance with you. They'll take turns one by one. When an enemy strikes, you have to press square at the right time to counterattack, which either kills lower level enemies or takes a portion of the boss's health away. It has to be earned. When using Kamui on bosses, the window to counterattack is extremely small and varies from boss to boss. As the game progresses, it's not just one precise counterattack and then you're done. No, bosses will eventually get more and more phases to be counterattacked for you to take the full damage. It's a double-edged sword because while you have the opportunity to do a lot of damage, if you time it wrong, the enemy takes a portion of your health instead. I'm making it sound more grand than it actually is because we all know what happens when an enemy hits you. HP gets lost. Violations 2, 5, and 6. 2. Does the game have other modes? Nope. 5. Does it have a mechanically complex combat system? I love the combat system, but it's very surface level. 6. Is the gameplay based around a gimmick? I'm taking half points on this one because Kamui is basically a gamble. It'd be ridiculous to not use it. The only reason I'm taking half points is because the move itself is extremely hard to time on bosses. If you were to do a second run of this game, it'd just be building meter to do Kamui's. Genji, Dawn of the Samurai scores a solid 8.5 out of 10. You guys are gonna be genuinely surprised at how high this one is on the tier list, because it even surprised me. I was not prepared for how complete Ghost Rider was. It's like if God of War and DMC had a baby. The combos were sick. Sick! I was launching enemies left and right. The combinations and animation cancels in this game make the combo potential near infinite. Infinite! My God, this game was dope. Dope! It was just so fun experimenting with the combat system. I was in shock that it was so good. Am I really playing this? And is it really Ghost Rider? If you like stylish action games, pick up an emulator and try this right now. I was discovering tech Game Breaker God probably didn't. Dot kick cancels. Anyways, 2. Does the game have other modes? No. That's literally the only thing holding it back. I think this deserves a 10 on my personal list. Ghost Rider scores a roaring 9.75 out of 10. This game is dope.
Now Johnny sees no rest. When called, he must become the rider and exact vengeance on those who spill the blood of the innocents.
GoldenEye Garo. I'll keep this one short. Cool game. Definitely something I would have enjoyed as a kid. Note 1. This game's lock-on system is pretty bad and unresponsive. Note 2. This game is basically abusing the aerial raid thing from Senran Kagura, even though this came first, to combo enemies to death. There's not much nuance to the combat system beyond that, if you want to count that as any bit of nuance. Violations 5, 7, and 16. 5. Does it have a mechanically complex combat system? Most of what you do is this aerial raid thing like Senran Kagura, which makes me wonder if that's where they got the inspiration for the mechanic. That's all, just time that right and stun lock the enemy. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? These bosses are actually really cool, but to say that they test skills is an overstatement plus tax. The only thing the game really tests you on is its jankiness with the lock-on system and the field of view perspective at times. 16. Does the game lack enemy variety? Yup, this scores GoldenEye Garo a 7.75 out of 10.
くだらないゲームは終わりだ。
奴は存在自体がゲームなのさ。
I think Kaya Dark Lineage was extremely ahead of its time for a 2003 release despite it not being popular. So while I think the game is great, it definitely overstays its welcome. You fight the same enemies over and over again and it gets a bit tiring. It's a platformer / combat oriented title, so that's where its strengths lie. I was genuinely surprised with how much of a full game Kaya actually turned out to be. Definitely an underrated classic, but the kinks in the armor kinda helped me understand why kids weren't going to their friends saying, oh, you should get Kaya Dark Lineage. The combat gets fun after you get a specific upgrade because it allows you to launch the big enemies into the air and combo them. And beware, because the timing you need in order to hit specific combos is really tight. It wasn't complex by any means, but it does have a bit of depth. But that depth is really just using certain moves to exploit enemy AI. It had nice puzzles here and there. Overall, a complete game. Also, to anyone starting the game, do not leave a single wolfen unexercised. You will have no good, very bad day. Looking for the rest you didn't touch. Violations 5, 7, and 16. 5. Does it have a mechanically complex combat system? It has a nice tight juggle system, but it's not mechanically complex. There are some cool things you can pull off though, 100%. I'll show them off on the screen. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? I'll take half points because some bosses do test your hands, but for the most part, they're gimmicky. Stub his left toe, then while he's distracted, throw a boomerang at the ceiling fan to drop it on him and knock him out type stuff. That's not actually something you do in this game, but I gave a God of War Looney Tunes example. 16. Does the game lack enemy variety? I can't even elaborate on this one. No is all I have to say. If you played the game, you'd understand. Kai Dark Lineage scores a solid 8.25 out of 10.
You think you're capable of beating an army of wolfens?
I have nothing to lose anyway.
Legacy of Kain Defiance. For a 2003 game, it surprisingly has a bit of depth in the combat system that goes unexplained unless you experiment with the controls. It has a reverse stinger thing going on. While Dante does the lunge forward, you have to press forward attack at the same time, and he'll do this multiple slash animation mid-combo. I actually had a lot of fun with the combat. This game is basically what I like in action games, platforming and stylish combos. While there were definitely times I felt the platforming was a bit janky due to certain camera angles, it wasn't enough to ruin the experience. Legacy of Kain Defiance makes me upset for the fans who didn't get the last game to tie up the story. I can see how this is an underrated gem. It's being added to my list of PS2 must-plays. I found a lot while making this list. The enemies are active, you get punished for making bad decisions, and you can get stylish. This game seems way too ahead of its time in some aspects. It goes dirt cheap on Steam during sales for like 97 cents. The only annoying thing I'll tell you before purchasing is to be patient and rebind your keys to your controller. Violations 2 and 7. 2. Does the game have other modes? It does not. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? For the most part it does, but it only really has like 2 good boss fights and the others are gimmicky. So I'll take half points on 7. This scores Legacy of Kain Defiance a solid 9.25 out of 10. So let's clap that one up.
Harvester of souls, I created you. And to this function, my angel of death, you will return.
Mortal Kombat Shaolin Monks. I was holding off on playing this for a while. What hurt was when I'd see clips here and there, and I'm like, don't show me that because you're gonna make me act up and it'll get booted up ASAP. This game is pretty top notch. If I was a kid and I played it for the first time, I would have loved it. The combo variety in this game is cool. There's a lot of air mix-ups and other techniques that give Shaolin Monks its own type of feel. There's even fatalities that you can build up and use on opponents, so that's dope. The enemies are pretty aggressive and have counters for very specific situations such as launch states, so they'll all have weaknesses that need to be exploited, or some enemies need to be prioritized over the other due to projectiles. The game does a fair job of making you stay on your toes. There's a secret mode that you can unlock and it's just survival mode. Why they made that hidden, I have no idea, but they've notoriously had a lot of stupid stuff in the crypt, specifically that should just be in base game, but I guess stuff like that gives you more of an incentive to play. You can play a ton of characters in this game too. Granted, not in the same mode, but you can play Liu Kang, Kung Lao, Johnny Cage, Scorpion, and Sub-Zero in the story. There's a variety of other characters you can play in the versus mode. Why you can't play them in the story, I don't get it, but for the most part, this game doesn't violate a single review point, but it doesn't come as a surprise to me that it got a perfect score. Welcome to the club. 10 out of 10.
Johnny Cage. Lay it on me, Raiden. Bow, you idiot.
Nano Breaker. I wouldn't say there's like anything to be excited for when playing this game. It has button combinations and you can create your own combo routes, but the combat is very bare bones. It can be stiff at times. There's a lot of end lag and a lack of animation canceling. It doesn't provide a lot of player expression, if you catch my drift. That's basically what I mean. I'm trying to figure out how they failed with the combat aspect of this game when Konami is behind games like Castlevania Lament of Innocence. Now I actually want to note something from a video by Combat Overview on his video about Nano Breaker. So whenever I hear someone say you can't do something in an action game, in my head I take that as a challenge. So he claimed you can't juggle after the launcher in this game. This is about to be the stupidest correction to a claim you'll ever hear, but I actually found out that you can manage to hit the enemy once right before they hit the ground. Now, I don't know if it only works on this specific enemy, but I did it nonetheless. So it is possible, it just sucks. Also, one more thing. This is going to be the first time chronologically that I bring up Tekken in this tier list. Is Keith voiced by Brian's voice actor? Violations 5, 7, and 16. 5. Does it have a mechanically complex combat system? There's a grapple hook tech, but that's basically as deep as it gets. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? The regular enemies can be handled in abundance, but the bosses have a bunch of almost unavoidable cheap stuff for some odd reason. 16. Does the game lack enemy variety? Enemies get pretty sparse the further in you get. This scores Nano Breaker a 7.75 out of 10.
You think a cyborg militant as powerful as me would take the big dirt nap easily?
Okami. Firstly, I would like to say, I think this game is very cool and unique. Other than that, I really don't have any notes, so we'll go straight to the violations. Violations 5, 6, and 7. 5. Does it have a mechanically complex combat system? Nope. You do get other weapons, but the combat system is fairly basic. 6. Is the gameplay based around a gimmick? I'm going to take half points only for the fact that the gimmick I'm talking about, being the ink brush, is integral to the game as a whole, but since it's supposed to be used inside battle as well, that creates a plethora of gimmicks that the bosses revolve around. Their weakness is usually something very specific, in which you'll have to draw a shape with the brush that'll assist you at the right time to find the boss's weakness. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? All of the bosses are meant to be handled with the brush gimmick. They're not really hard unless you don't pay attention to the brushstrokes the game was teaching you. My honest advice is that if you're playing Okami, play it to finish it without taking breaks, because you'll most definitely come back and forget brushstrokes for very specific situations. It's a fairly long game, all things considered. This scores Okami a 7.75 out of 10. Samurai Western was surprisingly enjoyable. I didn't watch much gameplay prior to actually touching it, but it was a unique experience. There's a lot of games I'm playing that makes me wonder which one specifically inspired the Platinum Games dodge. They have a fetish for that or something. As unique as it is, the depth of the combat falls short. There's multiple weapons and there's kind of an ARPG aspect to it with the leveling system, which would have saved me a lot of heartache on the final boss. Please don't do what I did and level up your character. The story was cheesy, but it was unique. Imagine Ghost of Tsushima and how they wouldn't shut up about honor for every 2 seconds. But the context in this situation is that your brother gave up the samurai way to use guns. And you gotta give him the whooping that mama never did, because you gotta prove to him that the sword is as powerful as the wielder. When you master the timing for dodges, the game will get infinitely more fun. Violations 4, 5, 7, and 16. 4. Does it have interesting level designs? I took a point for this because it reuses levels a lot. They're just battle arenas. 5. Does it have a mechanically complex combat system? Nah. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? The game is more dependent on timing your dodges than actual skill itself. The enemies don't pose a threat until they overwhelm you with their abundant numbers to the point where you have absolutely no idea what's going on. 16. Does the game lack enemy variety? Yes. This scores Samurai Western a 7.5 out of 10.
I think you're a little confused. You should think long and hard about who your real enemy is.
My real enemy?
Shinobi. I have a lot to say about this game. Did I enjoy it? Yes. Was it one of the biggest pains in my ass? Yes! The game throws you in and does absolutely nothing to explain any of its core mechanics to you. If it does, my bad. This game wants you to go through the level as fast as possible without making a single mistake. And I'll tell you right now, you'll make mistakes. And a lot of them. The worst part is that when you die, you have to start the entire level over. So they want you to do it in one take or nothing at all. The bosses are extremely gimmicky and set up in a way where you have to perfectly execute maneuvers in order to kill them. But Sega thought it was cute to implement a system for Hatsuma, the main character, where if he doesn't actively kill demons, his health will steadily decrease. God forbid you suck and you're at the boss with 3 hit points left. Why is this important? Because when you go through the levels, it's integral that you collect scrolls. What do these scrolls do? Glad you asked. They store up a special move for you to use against the boss. But here's the thing, you don't just spam them and go do a celebratory jack-off victory for the ancestors. No, you have to rack up these circles through calculated kills. Once the boss spawns these enemies, you have to kill them as fast as possible. While these orbs are at their max, you can do the most damage to the boss. And when I say it's a lot of damage, I mean it takes like 9 swings max on most bosses to kill them once you've killed all the enemies and stacked all the circles. Maybe even less. It's wild how much damage you can do. I'm not even going to use my footage to prove this point. I'll just show you someone who actually knows what they're doing. So once you have all the circles, what you want to do is use up all of the scrolls you collected throughout the level to do max damage. You better not mess up with all of them in storage. Why? If you die, the game resets you back to full HP, but they only leave you with 1 scroll, as if the game wasn't hard enough. They did everything in their power to make you feel like you were playing an 80s game without quarters. Because if you want a biblically accurate depiction of hell, just go to an arcade machine and try Ghouls and Goblins. That's what Shinobi felt like. 3D Ghouls and Goblins.
Horny people have no rights.
5, 6, 7, and 16. 5. Does it have a mechanically complex combat system? No. The way you approach most enemies is spamming X, O, and triangle. I think, was the button to hit? I made a mistake and forgot to write this after beating it. 6. Is the gameplay based around a gimmick? The entirety of the game is based around one move you have to abuse. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights, which test your skills? They don't test your skills. The bosses are designed in a way where it's like a puzzle and you have to find the best alignment and timing to beating them. 16. Does the game lack enemy variety? Yes. This scores Shinobi a solid 8 out of 10.
The Oboro are dead. You are the leader of nothing.
Their deaths shall be avenged by my blade. I do not need your help.
While playing this game, I generally thought it was the same as Shinobi, but as I kept playing and doing a little research, I noticed that Nightshade, or Kunoichi depending on which one you want to call it, had a bit more going on for its mechanics, while Shinobi was based on the gimmick of killing and getting through the level as fast as possible or else you'll die. Nightshade doesn't give that issue to the player to worry about the entire time. They want you to build up that purple meter and kill enough enemies to get access to a special move you get by holding square. It's basically a one-shot kill if you set it up right. So let me explain this again. When you kill an enemy, this blue thing that hovers around your purple meter is a timer. As you chain kills and move on to the next enemy, your damage goes up. For as long as you keep that chain going and you keep the blue meter from depleting, your damage gradually rises. This trivial piece of information is extremely integral for when you're fighting bosses. There will be an interval where they'll spawn adds or minions, whatever you want to call them again, and you have to kill them as fast as possible. The game wants you to do this. It advocates this. It normally spawns them in increments of 5. Once you kill them, the boss will be at their most vulnerable because your chain kills act as a damage multiplier. So for as long as this blue meter is still up after you've gotten your last kill, it's now your main objective to hold square and tap it again once you see this animation play out. And every single kunai that hits the boss during the small interval while the blue meter is depleting will do max damage to the boss and basically one-shot them. It's like hacks that you have to earn. And once you learn that, you'll realize that that is realistically how you're supposed to efficiently deal with each boss. Sounds easy, but this entire setup is extremely easy to mess up, because this game is a bit dated. You'll die a lot and have to restart because you messed up a single platforming section, which they designed to be annoying on purpose. You'll have to sit through entire phases of bosses again and again. You'll run into parts that clearly weren't QA tested or given proper feedback. You'll have to restart a lot because you messed up the setup, and many times you'll realize that you're doing something wrong. So my one word of advice when playing Shinobi and Nightshade is to be quick but patient. But most importantly, be patient. These two games were probably some of the most annoying I've ever played, but I'm glad that I got through them. If you're a masochist like me, then by all means, subject yourself to this torture. But on the bright side, after you beat it, you unlock Hatsuma from the first game. The game even goes the extra mile to teaching you before you pick him that his gimmick from the first game is back, and you'll have a different play style and experience when switching him. So that's cool. There's 2 other characters, but you get my point. I'm going to have PTSD if I hypothetically hear someone bring this up. Violation 6 and 7. 6. Is the gameplay based around a gimmick? Same as the first game. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights, which test your skills? Same as the first game. This scores Nightshade a solid 8.5 out of 10.
So begins my life as a rogue shinobi. Today's not my day.
This video is getting long, like I said before, so I'll just flat out say this game isn't very complex. But I do want to point out one thing. It had the wall jump before Ninja Gaiden came out. I think Kaya Dark Lineage did too, but I'm at the point where I'm typing up parts of the script, and there's almost a year's worth of time difference between me playing other games. So I barely remember. Ain't that crazy. Violations 2, 5, and 7. 2. Does the game have other modes? It does not. 5. Does it have a mechanically complex combat system? Very basic. It actually has the input for the Devil May Cry launcher, funnily enough. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? Most, if not every boss, is gimmicky and the enemies don't really do much. This score spawned Armageddon a 7.75 out of 10.
Wanda, a love that haunts me. A love that no longer exists.
Swords of Destiny on the PS2. I don't really have much to say about this game. I know I said I talked about them in depth, So let's start with that and nothing else. I can imagine as I'm writing this, the video is getting fairly long anyways. So you have a basic attack string. You have some roll attack that leads into a launcher, but it doesn't lead into much. I think this game takes inspiration from Shinobi because I think you're meant to dash in while locked on to do damage. But I'm probably grasping at straws here. It just feels like it while playing. But this is where the real mechanic of the game is. You see that red circle, you freak? Well, you gotta hit that. How? So when an enemy does an attack, there will be the smallest window in the world to do the most damage to the enemy. I'm talking so small that if you needed a person to get the job done in a TV show, the camera would pan over to the contortionist that didn't want to get wrapped up in their old jewel heist days in Tennessee. So after they attack, well, you're locked on, it'll flash red and you have to hit within that small window. All enemies have these small windows to do the most damage to them. That is basically it. I don't have more to say. That's all. I guess it's time to move to those violations I'm known for. Violations 2, 4, 5, 6, and 7. 2. Does the game have other modes? Nope. 4. Does it have interesting level designs? It's like how Chaos Legion is at times, which I thought was lazy for that game also. You break these rock things to keep the surrounding enemies from spawning in a specific area, and it also allows you to pass into the next area. While that isn't its main gimmick, some of these levels can feel drawn out for a game that doesn't have a complex combat system. 5. Does it have a mechanically complex combat system? You remember that thing I said earlier where the game makes you dependent on that red circle? Yeah, I think I was pretty clear about that. 6. Is the gameplay based around a gimmick? The red circle. When I tell you that you do absolutely no damage to bosses if you don't time those red circle hits right, I'm exaggerating, but it's still next to nothing. Like, literally, it's almost next to nothing. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? The only thing this game tests you on is whether you've mastered the individual timing on when each enemy's red circle pops up. Swords of Destiny scores a 7 out of 10.
If you can rescue Tao Zhang, Mengwei will be... Forgive me, Lei Yun.
Shifu!
The Matrix Path to Neo. The combat system for this game has so much depth and love put into it that I think it would be a crime if I tried to break it down because I wouldn't do it justice. So I'm just gonna put Ban Games footage in the background to show you guys all these possibilities. I was genuinely surprised at how many moves were in this. Are air juggles a prominent thing in this game? Sadly, no. But despite that fact, there's a lot of variety. For an example of how many options there are in a saying it without saying it way, there's a forward grab, a back grab, a left grab, and a right grab. That's just fist. That's not even taking into account the multiple weapons and other fighting styles that you can use, all which have their own movesets. The bosses aren't pushovers, and you actually have to pay attention. Are they gimmicky sometimes? Yes, when it involves a lot of shooting. But the bosses with some real love put into them's gimmicks actually add to the challenge of you staying alert as opposed to something that would force you to strike the heart when the enemy does a taunting animation or throwing a bomb at the boss 3 times to knock it down. None of that. I can personally see myself going back to this game in the future. Pretty cool gem that reminds me of the Arkham games in a way. Violation 6 and 16. 6. Is the gameplay based around a gimmick? Personally, I thought this was gonna be obvious. There's a lot of sections in this game that are trivialized by the slowdown time effect. The game is still cool nonetheless. 16. Does the game lack enemy variety? I honestly wouldn't have taken a point off if it weren't for the fact that the enemies didn't all do the same thing. The Matrix Path to Neo scores a solid 9.25 out of 10.
You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
You know what? I don't want to be seen as a hater. It's not about ego or anything. It's just that people don't listen. And I don't want to come off like I'm complaining about this game and it's actually not that bad. And I tend to raise my voice and scream while reading the script. And it's very obvious that I'm not actually upset. So instead of it coming out of my mouth, let's read it from someone else. All right, let's pull it up. All right, here we go. Alright, so here we have Nightmare Before Christmas for the PS2. It's also on the Xbox. I had high expectations going into this game, not just because it's based on one of the best stop motion movies of all time and because it was being made by Capcom, but also because Capcom has made quite a few really excellent licensed games around that time, before and a few since. The presentation and the optimization of this game is absolutely top notch. Everything looks and sounds like it's taken straight from the movie except for the frame rate, which is smooth, 60 at all times. The music was actually redone to fit more into the sequence in the games, featuring voices of the voice cast from the game to not feel out of place, as well as various adjustments to the lyrics, which still doesn't mean it ain't copyrighted to hell and back, but whatever. And the voice cast for the game sounds incredibly professional considering it's Capcom. The writing is also very fitting to the theme and atmosphere of the movie, even though the story's not exactly that strong. Now, when it comes to the whole rest of the game, strap up, it's a bumpy ride. The genre choice is fundamentally wrong. I have no idea why anyone at Capcom felt the need to make this into a Devil May Cry style game. The movie only had one fight scene, which was still mostly dancing. Jack's most recognizable traits are that he's swift and agile, and that he can jump. Now, what genre fits that? Maybe a goddamn 3D platformer? But you know what? That would not be so bad on its own if the gameplay was enjoyable, but, well, even the original Xbox has a better DMC style game on it, which coincidentally was also based on a movie. It's Van Helsing. Play that instead. I'm going to sum up my main gripe points here. Combat is incredibly repetitive, as you can only have 3 to 4 attacks and no combos. The game is excessively grindy, forcing you to replay stages dozens of times to afford upgrades. The weapon upgrade shop is hidden unless you go left in the witch's shop. You'll never know it's there, and the camera angles in the shop do not give a single hint there is anything more there. The difficulty is pretty cheap, with enemies often sniping you from off screen and throwing projectiles without any audible sound cue. Continue system is sadistic, as it makes you pay a percentage of your money to essentially reset the whole stage. Very few instances where that's not the case. There's almost no situation where reloading a save isn't a better solution. The rhythm minigames are absolute bullshit. They use up to 8 different inputs, which all come from the same direction without any distinctive sound cue. Not only that, the sound mixing makes it nigh impossible to actually hear the tone. I used a cheat code cause fuck it. Most missions are artificially padded with pointless walking, with literally nothing going on, and backtracking for health and such, which doesn't get replenished upon finishing a mission, which wouldn't be as annoying if not for the fact that there is a strict time bonus on each stage. The game's simultaneously too bare bones to be enjoyable as a DMC style game, and too hard for most non-gamer fans or of the movie to pick up and enjoy. Violations 2, 4, 5, and 6! Ah!
I don't believe we've met. I'm Jack. Jack Skeleton.
The Sword of Etheria. This is the first game I've ever played where the combat is literally just volleyball. The timing for that unique juggling mechanic is pretty fun to get used to. I almost don't want to call it a gimmick. I can explain it like this. Let's assume we're fighting a boss, right? You build up their stun meter and you get to juggle them freely until they gain their senses back. Now, the hypothetical is if the volleyball mechanic didn't exist, you'd still be in a position to juggle the boss anyways, right? So I don't really see that as a means to take points off when that's just a part of the combat. It's a unique way to juggle that you have to earn. Violations 5. Does it have a mechanically complex combat system? As much as I like the combat system, it basically revolves around the volleyball mechanic that I mentioned earlier. It's not hard to pull off and doesn't require some super deep knowledge of the game to understand. Smack them, then they'll smack them back. Rinse and repeat. This scores the Sword of Etheria a solid 9 out of 10.
Please, boy. Set him free just like you did for me.
Urban Reign is probably one of the hardest and most annoying experiences you'll ever have, but scratches all the right itches. Is the game grounded? Yes. Are there multiple ways to mix up and combo enemies? Yes. There's tech upon tech in this game to the point where it's not an exaggeration. Enemies can evade out of your combos randomly, and then there's even setups for if you anticipate an enemy resetting themselves. You can weaken enemies' limbs to give yourself more of an advantage to make them take more damage if you aim there. Time encounters, grapples, juggling, learning how to handle one-on everyone's situations, and enemies' habits and exploits that are literally in the game on purpose if you take the time to discover them. The best way I can describe playing Urban Reign is like if King from Tekken was in an action game, which is actually funny to think about because Law and Paul are in this game. It's published by Bandai and made by Project Soul, who makes Soul Calibur, which is produced by Harada, who also makes Tekken. then how it plays also makes sense on top of that when taking all that into account because of Tekken Force, for anyone who's old enough to know what that is. Imagine the Tekken 6 story mode, but the way that plays was called something different back in the day. I won't lie, this game was giving me a good workaround. It's almost like they don't want you to beat it, but the challenge in itself is so tempting that you won't stop playing it. Unless you don't like hard games, then that's understandable. Every time I booted up a mission, I learned something new. That's a good thing for a game's mechanics to be so in-depth that you consistently learn how to deal with every situation by forced experimentation. And it's not like the game punishes you for losing. The only thing you can't do is move to the next stage if you don't beat the current one. It's an advanced and unique beat 'em up due to how unforgiving it is. Normally, beat 'em ups don't require too much thinking, but Urban Reign sets that bar super high. Personally, I think anyone who likes the subgenre would appreciate Urban Reign. This is 100% a hidden gem, 10 out of 10.
Nobody's innocent. Justice? It's an illusion.
Van Helsing started off strong, but it fell off near the end. If you ever needed a game to compare to DMC2 in terms of shooting, I found it, bro. Because by the time you get to the later half of the game, it's necessary to even beat it. I'll just say it. They give you a damn Gatling gun in the last 2 or 3 levels. A Gatling gun! I thought it actually started off fairly good. I was getting used to the combat system until it got completely thrown out the window, but how this game plays sort of makes sense when you think about it. DMC 1 came out in 2001 and DMC 2 came out in 2003. And it's not like there were many DMC clones back then, so some of whatever DMC 2 was probably bled into Van Helsing. But then again, it's Van Helsing. It's fitting for a monster hunter to use ranged weapons more than melee, so I guess that's what they were going for. You have a standard launcher, the air combo doesn't really have much conversion, and some guns. I hate comparing games to other games, but I can't be more on the nose when I tell you this is DMC at home. Like, bro, is this not Ifrit's combo? Short game, nonetheless. 2 things to note. 1, finish mission with hat on is probably one of the most unique achievements I've ever seen in a video game. 2, I can't name a single game that goes to the main menu in real time. That almost blew my mind for no reason. Violations 5, 6, and 7. 5, does it have a mechanically complex combat system? It was promising at first, but the further you get into the game, you can't pull off anything complex. The standard launcher it gives you doesn't lead into much. As I'm typing this, I just theorized the combo with the grappling hook. Okay, this is an interjection. They don't allow what I theorized when I edit that. I love trolling myself in my own script, but I'll say this. For the time that it came out, its combat wasn't bad. I just wish it wanted you to engage with it more. 6, is the gameplay based around a gimmick? Shooting everything in sight with your OP weapons that some enemies are specifically weak to. 7, does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? I'll take half points for this one. The game felt overall balanced at first with the enemies and bosses until you get further in. That's when they get cheesy and overwhelming since it lacks defensive options. Van Helsing scores a solid 8 out of 10.
If she dies, the spirits of her ancestors shall never enter the gates of St. Peter.
Oni-Chambara, the Oni-Chambara, Zombie Zone, Zombie Hunters 1. I don't know how many names this one game could possibly have, but regardless, I'm still inclined to think I played the wrong version just because of the 25% chance that I'm right. They had English subtitles on default, so I guess we were off to a good start. The game is a bit monotonous. I'm starting to understand where people get the whole I don't like button mash games from this alone. Zombie Zone is forgiving, but the annoyance outweighs the forgiveness. / goes Aya, the main character of Oni-Chambara. I'm annoyed, says me, who was on his last nerve with the game. So now that I played the first game, it's now evident that they think peak game design is sitting in one room for 10 minutes, slashing away at zombies. I will note that the combat is clearly inspired by DMC. You have Stinger, a standard launcher, a lock-on roll, and probably other things Dante has aside from guns. So now, what's the issue with this combat? It doesn't get much deeper than that. There's follow-ups, but it's nothing to get stylish with. So it's DMC at home, but without the complexity of the move list diversity of the main character and responsive enemy. Violations 4, 5, 6, 7, and 16. 4, does it have interesting level designs? The entire game is to get a key card from somewhere to move on to the next area. 5, does it have a mechanically complex combat system? It has good framework, but lacks in the execution department. 6, is the gameplay based around a gimmick? You see this meter right here? When it's filled all the way up, Aya goes berserk. It starts somewhat drastically draining your HP when it happens. You need an item or to complete as much of the stage as possible before you die. The strat the game is kind of anchored on without telling you is that there will be sections where you have to purposely go into that mode to kill specific enemies. Kill them fast enough after collecting the key card, then cheese the boss in the next room with your overpowered damage. But be warned, it requires you to not get hit while charging up the damn thing for like 10 fucking minutes. So good luck with that cheese strat I told you about. The average player probably has like a quarter HP to their name by that point. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? Nah. It's a bunch of gimmick enemies in a room that move slow and have cheesy attacks that hit you from off screen because the camera in this game is absolutely terrible. And people complain about Ninja Gaiden, which is funny. 16. Does the game lack enemy variety? Indubiously. Onichambara, Zombie Zone, whatever you want to call it, scores a 7 out of 10. Zone of the Enders. It's cool. I wouldn't say it's anything to write home about other than that it came before DMC. The combat's pretty basic and it's very rinse and repeat throughout. I don't really have much to say, so I guess silence speaks louder than words in this instance. Violations 2, 5, 7, and 16. 2. Does the game have other modes? It does not. 5. Does it have a mechanically complex combat system? It does not. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? It does not. A lot of recognized A, B, and C stuff. The AI does get more difficult as the game progresses though, I won't lie there. 16. Does the game lack enemy variety? Absolutely. Zone of the Ender scores a 7.5 out of 10.
Damn it! Come on, come at me.
Zone of the Enders 2. Wholeheartedly, this part is going to be short. These games are basically identical. No need to go on another spiel about what it is and what it isn't. Violations 2, 5, 7, and 16. 7.5 out of 10.
You can't deceive me with beautiful words like freedom and independence anymore. Do you realize how many of my comrades died back there?
Anarchy Reigns holds true to its name like MadWorld. They're both chaotic games where literally anything could happen and will happen. Something cool about this game is that it's arguably the first of its kind. How so? The game is kind of meant to be played online. So with the combo heavy character action elements, the PvP is basically like if Dante was in a lobby with other Dantes. It sounds cool, but we live in a world where things only get attention 10 plus years after they come out. So this would probably do well in the modern day where people are a little more cultured. As wrong as that sounds, the combat system in this game has a lot of nuance to it, and each character you play works a bit differently than the last. Nobody plays the same. Did I mention that this game has 18 playable characters? A lot of combo variety for everyone. Air juggles, ground mix-ups, resets, grapples, and anything else you can think of. On top of the fact that this game has so many infinites that it would give a fighting game without a day one patch a run for its money. Imagine how that works out online. The story mode isn't long, but I think that's because it wants you to play online. Great game, but the frame rate definitely kills it sometimes, and that usually doesn't bother me. Violation 2. 2. Does the game have other modes? I'm not counting online as another mode since the single player experience is integral to this subgenre. Much like Ghost Rider, Anarchy Reigns falls short by 1 review point to keep it out of the perfect score territory. Anarchy Reigns scores a very high 9.75 out of 10.
So long, brother. May your horns grow long.
MadWorld is one of those games with a lot of love, but simplistic at heart. Funny as all hell, but I wouldn't say the gameplay is the thing that necessarily carries it. Here's another game with a pseudo witch time ability. If you do a perfect dodge, you get a slow-mo effect, but other than that, there's a variety of combinations that the game teaches you from the jump. How many poles you can stick in someone, where you can stick people, the multiple ways people can get sticked in without being executed. Excuse my lack of personal footage. I was going through a hard drive issue and was running out of space due to this tier list. Actually, it was destroying my internal and external hard drive. Tier list is getting huge, so don't mind me while I move to the review points. Violations 2, 5, 7, and 16. 2. Does the game have other modes? It does not. Correct me if I'm wrong though. 5. Does it have a mechanically complex combat system? Nah, I'd argue that anyone can pull off these combos by accident. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? You'll be fighting more with the controls than the actual enemies. 16. Does the game lack enemy variety? Yes. This scores MadWorld a 7.5 out of 10.
What's going on, baby? Yeah, can't you see him? Hey, what you doing? I'm talking to the people. I'm breaking it down. Ah, God, bitch! I'm gonna pimp smack your ass when I get. Oh.
Blades of Time. Riding these at night has me fried. Let me go to sleep and come back. The next line will be a difference in awakeness. Okay, I'm awake. For the longest time, I seen gameplay footage of Blades of Time. Then recently, I saw someone do a launcher and a quick combo. Then I'm like, oh snap! Now imagine what I could do when I get my hands on the game. It was honestly nothing like that. Despite the existence of the launcher, the combat was very bare bones. The reverse time mechanic was cool, but my only issue with it is that it wasn't accurate a lot of the time. More than often, an enemy would probably glitch and just do the 1,000-yard stare while it's waiting for you to finish using the ability, only for it to course correct in a direction or state that it wasn't supposed to be in. But I'm not harping on it. In my head, I'm not considering this some big budget action game. For crying out loud, it's a major improvement from X-Blades, which I decided to not add to this tier list for some reason. I'm trying to finish this thing before Ninja Gaiden 4. Violations 5, 6, and 7. 5. Does it have a mechanically complex combat system? No. Like I said earlier, there's a launcher and a quick conversion. As for other moves, they're just special abilities that the game encourages you to use. 6. Is the gameplay based around a gimmick? The reverse time mechanic I mentioned earlier is so OP that it, to a degree, makes enemies a non-threat, and I found ways to make them pretty pathetic. There's even enemies where it wants you to abuse the time manipulation to overwhelm them. It gets very repetitive. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? It does not. It's a very abused mechanic to do A, B, and C when we tell you to type of game. A lot of anything in the game is trivialized by the time reversal mechanic anyway. This scores Blades of Time a 7.5 out of 10.
You can escape from this place.
Is this true? Of course not, you fool! She doesn't know anything. Go back to your post and guard the portal.
So, Bloody Spell. I surprisingly had more fun with it than I thought I would. It was like if Dark Souls met DMC, if you catch my drift. Multiple weapons to use, weapon switch, and no, do not think about Stellar Blade as I say that. Shut the f up. You guys don't know what you're talking about if you compare those two. Air combos, yeah, something Stellar Blade doesn't add. I wish I recorded it, but my hard drive was running out of space, but I technically found an infinite that you could do even on mini bosses, so that was fun. Want to know the worst part? I figured it out in the very last section of the game. So basically like 20 minutes before the end. Should I boot it up again for footage? We'll see. I'll put my gameplay in the background if I do. I got like 7 months to do it. Anyways, there was some jank here and there. Enemies had questionable hitboxes and their mechanics weren't implemented properly, so they'll probably get free damage off you here and there. The combat was fun though. Easy to do, but demanding to pull off if that makes sense. Let me see if I can give you a good example of how your controller will sound.
Hear that? That's a good game.
I was genuinely surprised by the quality. I understand that it was in early access for like 3 years, so it did have time to develop and grow. I personally liked the execution. The game was easy by no means, and there were sections that were very unforgiving. I will claim that they were a bit unbalanced, but I do like a challenge here and there. Out of all of the indie CAGs I played, this is definitely a must play alongside Assault Spy. The Soulsy similarities aspect may not be for everyone, but all I tell you is to give it a try for like 2 hours and just try to cook. Like launch an enemy and experiment. Violations 4 and 16. 4. Does it have interesting level designs? I would say no. Bloody Spell remains kinda samey throughout, no matter what the scenery is. Nothing really changes. You'll find a guy here and there for mini games, but that doesn't add much to the overall experience. 16. Does the game lack enemy variety? Absolutely. My god, the enemies got old. This leaves Bloody Spell at a solid 9.5, which is good for an indie game. But remember, the scores aren't indicative of quality. They represent how much this game fits into the stylish action genre. So, yeah. Fun fact, this is the first game on the tier list with the letter C. Hooray! This game overstayed its welcome. That's my only personal gripe. I'm honest first and honest last. With that out of the way, I'll just spoil ahead of time that this game didn't receive a single violation. I liked it. The puzzles got a bit overabundant near the end, but one-on-one boss sections and combat sections in general felt great. They chose a really good layout for the controller because when I went straight into the game, it didn't really take me long to get used to the combat encounters. Speaking of combat, there was so much variety to choose from in combos, like, wow. I was theorizing so much in my head during my playthrough, and while I didn't perform anything crazy, I could see the potential. The move list in this game is humongous. I'm talking DMC levels of humongous, but for one character. Gabriel, that's the main character's name, has an insane selection. You consistently get new moves and abilities as the game goes on, arguably more than Hi-Fi Rush. I'm not going over them, that's how much there is to cover. Castlevania Lords of Shadow is a stylish action game through and through. The game is long, but play it. No violations, 10 out of 10, that surprised me.
Than that. You would rather rule in power and might than to offer forgiveness and love. This is why you are cast out, Unholy One.
You dare to challenge me?
Castlevania Lords of Shadow 2. That was a roller coaster of emotions. I really got invested in the story, but this one, well, I think it was fine. There are some critiques I could add about the gameplay. I have no idea who thought it was a good idea to deviate from the original flow of the first game by adding 4 stealth sections. I'm gonna be real with you. If you have a heavily focused combat driven game, for the love of all that is holy, don't add stealth sections into your game. I'm cool with puzzles, but stealth sections gotta go. The audience who buys games like DMC, God of War, Bayonetta, Ninja Gaiden, and whatever else you can think of don't buy these pieces of plastic or digital software to not have their hands moving at Mach 5 on the controller. That ain't gameplay. That's just moving a stick around and waiting for a prompt to pop up to assassinate. There's Assassin's Creed and then there's God of War. You take your pick for gameplay loop. And for anyone that picked Assassin's Creed, oh yeah, absolutely. Oh, I can't wait for stealth sections in Hi-Fi Rush 2. Like, what? My bad. Violation 7. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? Bosses get better as the game goes on, but they get a bit gimmicky with the unblockable attacks. Almost to the point where 90% of the last few final boss attacks were just cheesy unblockable attack strings that they spam and make you play a waiting game for. The last boss had so many unblockable attacks that his counterable attacks were rare. I just ended up dodging preemptively or jumping out of the way because why would I assume he's doing a regular attack? I won't act as if they don't test your timing, reflexes, and positioning at times though. The bigger issue would probably be that most of the other bosses are just gimmick fights. I'm talking those fights that are literally so easy that the devs have to throw ads at you while you deal with the boss. Shadow of the Colossus style. Look, the enemy's weakness is exposed type bosses, Simon Says type bosses, and red light type bosses, and let's give you an OP move that makes the boss a non-threat in the second phase type bosses. Which is funny because the first Lords of Shadow game definitely had moments like this, but handling bosses was a bit more grounded and less based around cheap tactics. If not for the final few, it was really inching towards the full point. Castlevania Lords of Shadow 2 scores a high 9.5 out of 10.
That's why the power of your God cannot destroy me, because I am his chosen one.
Deadpool. This was an interesting one on this list. Before I actually played it, I watched the Kashimaro Click video where he explained that the game actually has jump canceling for some odd reason. He was the first person to report on this, so I'm just passing along the word. It does indeed have jump canceling. Whether that was intentional, I have absolutely no idea. At times it feels like a glitch, but there's actually instances I recorded during my playthrough where there's certain enemies that'll cancel your combo midway if you keep juggling them in the air for too long. So a part of me wants to believe that it was intentional, but another part of me believes that it's a glitch. It's a bit too good to be true, and it's an oversight on the devs' part. Aside from that, I had fun juggling. Is it the most complex thing in the world? Not at all, but it was still fun nonetheless. Violations 5 and 7. 5. Does it have a mechanically complex combat system? It does not. Does it have hidden sauce and cool combos for what's integrated in the system? Yes. Is there enough depth to it that you find yourself struggling to pull anything off? No. Is it stylish? Yes, but that's not the point of the review points. 7. does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? This game bases itself on overwhelming you with numbers of enemies that shoot you with pinpoint accuracy at every corner to the point where you kind of have to make a point about the enemy design. While you do regenerate health over time, it's sometimes almost impossible to be in any open space without an enemy destroying 75% of your HP while focusing on one person. It's a bit over the top. Oftentimes, I will find myself running away to places enemies had a hard time getting to because the bullets would basically be my get sent back to the checkpoint and do this 20 to 30 minute section all over again free card. The bosses for the most part were gimmicky and the others were launchable, but don't get me wrong, I'm not against launchable bosses. I love that. But that aspect gets diminished by the fact that they're unable to break out of a jump cancel combo, which also adds to my theory that it's a glitch. But what do I know? Deadpool scores a solid 8 out of 10.
Come on, baby, we can still work this out.
You disgust me!
DMC Devil May Cry. As bad as this game's reputation is, its gameplay supersedes it. I was a DMC reboot hater as well, but that's only for the story, to be honest. It's tolerable, but it has a couple cliche kinks such as a protagonist who lost their memory, half angel, half demon. Like, come on, not to be hypocritical because I play Darksiders, but what is this? Artist First OC? And Edgy the Hedgehog! The combat is actually not bad. It gave me a lot to work with in the first hour of playing. The controls are clearly made for a Western audience while trying to keep it as close to the original, but it actually has more combo depth than a lot of games I played on this list. Obviously, it's not the original DMC. It's more accessible, but I can appreciate the execution for what it's worth. It doesn't make me feel like my time is wasted despite it not being tied to the original DMC. I finally mustered up the strength to play it because I told myself just treat it like an alternate universe version of DMC and nothing else. This is not DMC. I was just absorbing the story as is. It got a couple chuckles out of me, and while I'm not a hornball myself, I can appreciate that the game is unafraid to be sexy for both males and females, especially when most modern games are absolute cowards when it comes to sex appeal. Violation 7. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? Sooner or later, you'll realize that the entire game becomes a battle of matching reds and blues for the enemies. The bosses are very gimmicky. You can tell this game was made by Western devs. DMC Devil May Cry, despite what many think, scores a solid 9.5 out of 10.
I'm stronger. I'm smarter. I'm better looking. And I got a bigger dick.
Enslaved Odyssey to the West, an alternative take on Journey to the West. This game is a solid platformer, and I'm glad that it's no longer than 7 hours because it started getting repetitive. I played Enslaved when I was 9 or 10 and never beat it. Glad I finally got that out the way. Violations 5, 7, and 16. 5. Does it have a mechanically complex combat system? It does not. I figured out some guard cancel tech to abuse enemy hit stun though. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? No. They're all gimmicky. 16. Does the game lack enemy variety? Yes. This scores Enslaved Odyssey to the West a 7.75 out of 10.
You put this on me.
Let me explain.
Get this thing off, or I'm gonna rip your head off.
No.
No? You think I'm screwing with you?
Yes!
If you're the type to play games for story, you could skip God of War Ascension. If you're the type of person to play games for gameplay, I assume that's why you're on my channel in the first place. I would be a liar if I said that the combat in Ascension was bare bones, but is it bare bones in comparison to its predecessors? Absolutely. Hear me out. Hear me out. This one in particular felt like Santa Monica Studios was grasping at straws and needed to make another game as soon as possible, because not only does it feel watered down, it lacks the soul of the other three. And I'm not here to compare them like I think one is better than the other, but why do I say that? The game was much shorter than the others, and they made the execution of the combat much easier. How so? It doesn't feel like in order to do anything super cool in this game that my hands have to move at Mach 5. Why is that important? Because player expression in these games are important. So when you dumb everything down, it sort of, no, not sort of, it does take away from the identity of the series. And regardless of which one sells 20 million copies and whatnot, that doesn't change the fact that something can become unrecognizable. In this case, it's much closer than the new God of War games, so I most definitely can't use this as a talking point, but if you played all of them, you can feel a definitive difference. The change in direction since God of War 3 is rearing its head in Ascension. Ever since David Jaffe left the studio, the Zelda, Onimusha, and Devil May Cry identity of the series is basically gone. So, Violations 5 and 16. 5. Does it have a mechanically complex combat system? In comparison to the other God of War games, this one kind of feels gentrified, if that makes any sense. The super crazy combo stuff that you could pull off isn't even crazy. It's very easy in comparison to the other 3 titles. Why? To pull off some of the cool stuff, it's less dependent on switching weapons, magic management, and juggling. And hear me out on this one. In order to juggle enemies for years in the other God of Wars, took a bit of experimentation and setup. There's a lot you can do. Ascension's combat feels like a 5-year-old can do it. It's not as demanding, and the moves are arguably super overpowered in this one. They even eat chunks of the boss's invisible health bar. 16. Does the game lack enemy variety? Yes, this puts God of War Ascension at a solid 8.75 out of 10.
Break an oath with a god. Of all the minds in question, mine is not the one to worry about.
Heavenly Sword is kind of interesting when you think about the year and specific time it came out. 2007, September 12th, right before Assassin's Creed came out on November 13th. Why is this interesting? Because Heavenly Sword has the counter button allocated to triangle like in the Assassin's Creed games. I know that Assassin's Creed counter system is inspired by Prince of Persia, because for those who don't know, Assassin's Creed was actually supposed to be a Prince of Persia game. But it's always funny going back to these games to figure out which did it first. Other than that, the combat in itself isn't deep by any means. The overall gameplay loop is very grounded. While I did discover that there's a launcher, it doesn't lead into much, but you can juggle from it. But to say that the combat in itself gets much deeper than that would be disingenuous, to say the least. It's a God of War clone that gets part of the assignment, but I'll give it one thing for sure. This game is hilarious, like genuinely. I missed that early 2000 style of comedy. Alright, violations 2, 5, 7, and 16. 2. Does the game have other modes? Nope. 5. Does it have a mechanically complex combat system? Like I said before, there is a launcher. I mean, there's a bunch of combos to remember too, but most importantly, there's not much variety to the point where you would make it an entire video on it, coupled with combo mad. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? The bosses, for the most part, are very identify A, B, C to know which mechanic to use at the right time. An unblockable here and a counterable attack here. 16. Does the game lack enemy variety? Yup, I think there's only 9 enemy types. This scores Heavenly Sword a 7.5 out of 10.
You know as well as I do. We all know who brought this curse down upon us.
I am no curse.
Enough!
Killer is Dead is one of those obscure games by Suda51 that'll make you question everything, but they're normally fun to play, so I'm about to surprise you. This is like the only Suda51 game that actually has a launcher. Now look, all of his games have a character action / stylish action gameplay loop. You go through the level, you fight the boss at the end. He has stayed true to that ever since No More Heroes. You gotta give the guy credit. He's one of those he don't really fit in, but we cool with him type of guys in the space. The game is fun. I don't really have too much to say because there's not much to break down. Violations 5 and 16. 5. Does it have a mechanically complex combat system? While it does have a launcher and some juggle mix-ups, there's not really many ways to engage with the combat system for experimentation. 16. Does the game lack enemy variety? Yup. Killer is Dead scores a solid 8.75 out of 10.
The job? Killer is Dead.
Lollipop Chainsaw has jokes in it that if it was made today, people would try to cancel Suda51. Why did I start it off like that? With that being said, Lollipop Chainsaw is like one of those games that's enjoyable to play and fun to tell people that you beat it, but not one of those games you consider a crowning achievement for completing it. It has a plethora of unlockable combos, but to say this game has any depth would be a lie. On top of the fact that there's moves that clearly made it past QA testing because they honestly do way too much damage than I think the devs even realized. I forgot what combo it was, but I just ended up spamming it the entire time because if you line it up right, it chops zombies in half. Or was it their heads? Look, I don't know. I'm admittedly writing this part of the script extremely late after beating it 7 months ago. You would think I'm just slacking off with the tier list, but I'm not. With the script, yes. With getting these games played and ranked, no. But yeah, some moves are extremely overtuned. Did I enjoy Lollipop Chainsaw? Yeah, of course. Do I wish it was more polished? Absolutely. There's a bit of early 2010s jankiness to it. So, violations 2, 5, 7, and 16. 2. Does the game have other modes? Nope. 5. Does it have a mechanically complex combat system? It's a very basic command input system. X, X, Y, Y, X, 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 A, that type of stuff without juggles. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? I'm gonna have to say no. Most enemies are just gimmicky and slow. The bosses don't really add much to the overall experience. 16. Does the game lack enemy variety? Oh, absolutely. This scores Lollipop Chainsaw a 7.5 out of 10.
She is so cool. It's because of her, my sisters and I all wear our vaginas proudly.
I ranked this in a review from a few months ago and talked about it in depth. I gave it a 10 out of 10, so we won't be going into further detail about that. Marlowe Briggs and the Mask of Death. This game crashed on me like 15 plus times. Still beat it though. From the previews I saw of Marlowe, I thought it would have had a more serious tone. I was surprised to find out, despite all the death and destruction, that it was fairly lighthearted, so I'll get this out the way first. Marlowe Briggs is basically a God of War clone mechanic-wise, especially in regards to his magic system and overall control scheme. The one thing I wish I had was a proper deflect that isn't just relegated to projectiles. Aside from that, this game actually features on-the-fly weapon switching. Is there more to it than that? No. Are some weapons useless in comparison to others? Yeah. Violations 5, 7, and 16. 5. Does it have a mechanically complex combat system? Does it have a launcher? Yes. Air combos? Yes. Variety and so on? Aside from that, nope. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? A lot of the bosses are very gimmicky. Nothing that really requires skill. The enemies are spongy like in God of War, but the game doesn't really give you the proper mechanics to deal with them in hordes. It just gives you magic, which is OP, but if that's the only thing I'm allowed to do when I'm overwhelmed instead of incorporating proper defensive mechanics, then there's something missing. No harsh feelings, of course. I think the team did well with what they had. The only boss that felt like it was genuinely going in the right direction was the last one, which I did not record because my laptop was making turbine noises. 16. Does the game lack enemy variety? I would say yes. And by the end of the game, the enemies just become stronger, tankier versions of themselves, so you can't really consider them new enemies. Believe it or not, this game had a solid 8 until I thought about it. This scores Marlowe Briggs in the Mask of Death a 7.75 out of 10.
Do not call me Choo Choo.
As you wish.
Choo Choo.
Mitsurugi Kamui Hikai is like a stylish action game from the dollar store, but it's one of those gems you so happen to have fun with despite the price. The combos are a bit limited, but someone with an imagination can pull off some cool stuff. Why is it a game from the dollar store? Because you can beat it in 3 hours. I'll be honest, and this isn't a flex, I was troubleshooting this game to fix something with my audio, and that added to my time played. I spent time in training mode to figure some stuff out. I willingly lost to bosses to see if there were proper solutions to a boss's attacks, and I still beat the game in under 3 hours. It was still an enjoyable experience despite its length. Once you start unlocking some moves and getting used to how upgrades are implemented, everything starts flowing together pretty smoothly. So, Violations 2, 4, 7, and 16. 2. Does the game have other modes? Nope. 4. Does it have interesting level designs? Okay, so let me explain this because I rarely do this. The part in the parentheses that says, if level design isn't a game's strong suit, then forget this point. So I'll counter myself on this one. The inception of the character action game subgenre was built with the addition of sparse platforming. If it gets lazy, then sure, I'll take a point. But MKH only has fighting sections, and there's absolutely no issue with that, and I actually like that about the game. There isn't really much of a level, it's just a circle where enemies spawn. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? I'm taking half points on this. Enemies for the most part kind of just sit there and take it all day. That sounded wrong. So, some enemies actually fight back, and the final boss was definitely a major hurdle, but the bosses kept you on your toes, which is a good thing. 16. Does the game lack enemy variety? Yep. This scores Mitsurugi Kamui Hikai a solid 8.75 out of 10. Nier Replicant. For those of you curious about which game I played last on this tier list, it was actually this one. Anywho, this game does not care about your feelings. Jeez. This was definitely sadder than Automata. Aside from that, I don't really have any notes. The combat is okay, but nothing to write home about, which is surprising because if you look it up, Platinum Games helped with this remake. I wonder when the next Nier game is coming out. Yoko Taro's been swimming in 2B collabs for too long, featuring A2. Violations 5, 6, and 7. 5. Does it have a mechanically complex combat system? There's not many combinations you can do. There's a launcher, weapon switching, and the likes, but you won't really get much out of it aside from a floaty object in front of you that won't hit the ground because of some odd gravity coding on the hit state. 6 is the gameplay based around a gimmick. So this game is a real offender for its bullet hell aspect. It's completely overdone, and oftentimes you're forced to shoot stuff instead of engaging with it melee wise. It's almost advocated to shoot stuff instead of get close. It's actually so effective that you could just kill bosses without touching them once. I hate comparing games, but in Nier Automata it was less effective against bosses. 7, does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? Same as before. This score is Nier Replicant, a solid 7.5 out of 10.
Die! Die, die, die! I'm gonna pull out your teeth and cram them up your ass!
That woman's mouth is as fierce as her sword work.
Ninja Blade. Many of you might be familiar with this title. I don't think the game is bad, but I also don't think it's good. This is the one game that I think surpasses Asura's Wrath when it comes to quick time events. It somehow does that while having around the same amount of time to beat, but still manages to have more gameplay. It has a pretty extensive move list to unlock, but I'm not going to act like anything leads into the other. It has weapon switching, which is actually rare in this genre, or rather I should say rare around this time, since Ninja Blade came out on January 29, 2009. Yep, you heard that right. Ninja Blade predates Bayonetta, so I'll just address the elephant in the room. Ninja Blade is clearly a Ninja Gaiden ripoff. It has the swagger, cinematic spectacle, and overall presentation down pat. For crying out loud, the main character's name is Kain. Ninja Gaiden's protagonist is Ryu. If that's not a dead giveaway that they didn't hide their inspiration, then I don't know what is. I can explain in further detail where Ninja Blade falls short. Violations 2, 5, 7, 8, and 16. 2. Does the game have other modes? It does not. 5. Does it have a mechanically complex combat system? No. It surprisingly has a launcher, but it doesn't really lead into anything. Air combos are also not a prevalent thing in the game. You can jump, but anything after that isn't very useful for stylish or diverse interactions with the enemy. Despite that, I think the combat is serviceable, but janky at times to the point where it can be annoying. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? This game is nothing but gimmick bosses aside from 3. The enemies are super brain dead because they're like zombies, but they have these attacks that are almost impossible to react to when they finally do decide to lunge at you. And unless it's a humanoid enemy, and I'm talking about someone your size, you can't block a single thing bosses do. They also seem like they're intentionally designed to be annoying. What I don't understand is how developers sit there in the studio all day coming up with ideas for enemy design only to say, let's give the player the most unfun, annoying thing to fight of all time because they'll enjoy it. I don't get it. Like, Devil May Cry and Ninja Gaiden are right there to take notes from. Big dog, stop throwing me into a boss battle with a Simon Says behemoth. 8. Is the game littered with too many quick time events? Like I said before, I think Ninja Blade is arguably the worst defender on this list when it comes to this review point. It's so bad that if you die, you have to do an entire quick time event segment over again, depending on where the checkpoint was, and sometimes those things can be like 2 to 3 minutes long, all for it to do absolutely nothing to the boss's HP. They're just there for the sake of being there. I can't fathom why this was a design decision that you had to do a 3 to 4 minute quick time event section every 10 minutes in each mission. That's just insanity. You get into the boss segment, quick time event, you exit the boss segment, quick time event. And it's so bad that the quick time events have a tail. Look at this. So sometimes there's so many quick time events in the cinematics that they'll break them up into segments. 16. Does the game lack enemy variety? Very much so. This scores Ninja Blade a very low 5.5 out of 10.
A sword is not a weapon. Unless it is in the hands of one who is willing to use it.
No More Heroes 3 is a mixed bag. It's an entry in a series where you can tell it was trying too hard to be the first two. I rarely laughed and just kinda had an awkward smile at most parts, waiting for it to make me laugh, but I sorta stopped because I knew it wasn't coming. Good first game for newcomers, but a little too modernized for older fans. If this was your first No More Heroes game, you probably won't like the other games because I'm assuming the demographic who'd buy this comes from the era where crude humor is considered offensive. The game was very gimmicky and had cheesy stuff that superseded its predecessors, such as the slowing down time ability, which is extremely broken. I'm very fair when it comes to ranking because I won't make it a one-up for me, the player, if you give me a get-out-of-jail-free card. The bosses were pretty campy in comparison to the other games and somehow even more formulaic. And I know you're saying, wow, that's rich, saying this game's bosses were campy in comparison to No More Heroes 1 and 2. Listen, every boss in No More Heroes has a weakness, but I found that the solution for most things in No More Heroes 3 were set. Dodge in time or just hide behind something to avoid being hit. It's almost like they knew the enemies were too overwhelming, so they gave you a whole bunch of abilities to deal with them accordingly instead of relying on skill. At some point, you just feel like a tactician. This isn't me saying the game is bad because it's not like No More Heroes 1 and 2, quite the contrary. I think the game is fine aside from them not letting me spam lawnmower missions to pad out playtime, but something I missed from the other two is a sense of struggle. This is a universal thing I care about in all games. Violations 4, 5, 6, 7, and 16. 4. Does it have interesting level designs? I don't mean to compare, but the lead up to each boss was a little bit lazy in No More Heroes 3. The other games had you going through entire stages right before the boss, which some stages did in No More Heroes 3, but it lacked a charm to it. To be honest, there wasn't much level design in comparison to the last few. Even the mini games felt lazy. It doesn't really feel like you have to work for anything in this entry. 5. Does it have a mechanically complex combat system? Its combat is way more complex than its predecessors, but to call it complex by itself is a lie. 6. Is the gameplay based around a gimmick? No More Heroes 3 gives you these new moves that are so overpowered, it leaves no room to doubt that this game was crafted for a modern audience. I mean, geez. The dodge roll is the same button as a Souls game, but I'm talking stuff like slowing down time. It's been 7 months since I touched it, so excuse me if I'm forgetting the other abilities. I think there's a projectile one too. Oh, and the tiny mecha suit is also overpowered. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? No. Enemy in this game offers you a challenge that is beyond a gimmick. I'm taking half points because there's some bosses that are reminiscent of the older games. 16. Does the game lack enemy variety? Yup. This scores No More Heroes 3 a 7.5 out of 10.
And what happens once I take everyone out? For reals? I'll do it. Please, let me do it.
No straight roads. I'll tell you something about me. I used to make music and I recently stopped. While that's a whole can of worms that I'm not going to open up, but I appreciate how No Straight Roads handles the topic of how everyone makes music for different reasons. It was the way it was conveyed on how our individualism shapes our reasoning for picking up the craft. Sometimes we may not know why we do the things we do, but at the end of the day, it's art. And that art shapes the people around us no matter how little or small we are. I know the impact I made, and I can appreciate the person I became after my journey. With that being said, this game is alright, but from a stylish action standpoint, it violates some stuff. I still love it though. I'm a gameplay first type of person, by the way, and I can still say stuff like that. Violations 2, 5, 6, 7, and 16. 2. Does the game have other modes? Nah. I'm not counting the parry mode as a different one because it's basically the entire game over again, but it forces you to parry. 5. Does it have a mechanically complex combat system? That's the one thing I thought it would have to a degree. 6. Is the gameplay based around a gimmick? Unlike Hi-Fi Rush, No Straight Roads is way more about the rhythm in the gameplay when it comes to the enemies' animations. They're just always on beat, and it's to the point where you don't even have to worry too much about anything as long as you catch the rhythm. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? All the bosses are basically a rhythm catching match. Once you've gotten the rhythm, that's basically all it is from that point on. 16. Does the game lack enemy variety? Yes. No Straight Road scores a 7 out of 10. Jer the Orc is going to kill me for this. Hi Jer, remember, this isn't my opinion, love you.
Can you please stop punching my TV?
Samurai Jack Battle Through Time. So here's something kind of wild. Here's an interesting bit of lore. I managed to save this game 2 months prior to it being delisted, so I'm one of the very few who actually owns it. I think it was a fairly good game, all things considered. Tomonobu Itagaki was somewhat behind the involvement of this game, and if he actually did give any pointers to the team, it's very clear because if you've ever played Ninja Gaiden, it feels almost exactly like it, down to the way you launch enemies. There's no Azuna drop though, which is sad, and there is a plethora of moves and things to unlock, but to say the game has a super complex combat system would be disingenuous. The most interesting thing you'll find someone doing is XXYXXX. If that's the combination, I think it is. I like what I played though. It was challenging and I felt the Ninja Gaiden nostalgia. I just wish it had more to experiment with. Other than that, I'm a major cartoon head. I grew up with a lot of this stuff, so it was just nice seeing Jack back in action again. Still can't get over the fact that his name came from some hoodlum and he only accepted it because he forgot his real name. Anyways, it felt like a good old PS2 game, which is funny because he has a game on the PS2 and it's not really up to par combat-wise as Battle Through Time. It's fairly short and can get a bit repetitive, but I think the experience in itself is enjoyable enough. It follows the traditional gameplay loop of a character action game, which I think people will like. Violations 5 and 16. 5. Does it have a mechanically complex combat system? Nah. 16. Does the game lack enemy variety? Oh yes. This scores Samurai Jack Battle Through Time a solid 8.75 out of 10.
Laddie? Wee laddie! What in Sam Hoot Willie are you doing here?
Senran Kagura Shinobi Versus. So, oh my lord, I typed up an entire breakdown of mechanics. I'm just gonna read them all. The bosses are basically meant to be stun locked to the point where they can't move and transform. The game system is a bit poorly implemented when it comes to bosses because the boss, aside from one technical thing, is like fighting yourself. And the dodge mechanics and end lag on animations keeps you from consistently maneuvering or evading a boss's attacks. So if you mess up, the boss basically stun locks you to death unless you use the combo break ability, which alludes to my memory on what it's called. So when you take the time to actually sit down and think about it, it's a battle of who gets the first hit. Because after you take the time to learn the mechanics of each individual character and behavioral patterns of bosses, you can learn to stun lock them to death as they're able to do to you. Differences in gameplay. In Burst Renewal, you can guard cancel anything. You can guard cancel a run in each version, but the most effective one is Burst Renewals. Shinobi has some block cancels. You can guard cancel the ending animation of a ground slam attack immediately in Shinobi and Burst Renewal. The recovery to block is a bit slow in Shinobi, but it's passable. It's instantaneous in Burst Renewal. You cannot guard cancel any attacks in Estival Versus at all. Let me see if I can find this video I saw earlier, these two guys fighting each other online, where the guy whipped a ground combo and then bro just circled old girl to the side while his whole animation played out that he could not stop. You have to fully commit to attacks in Estival Versus, but there is one way to cancel attacks. You do it by jumping. So then you'd ask, so it's a jump cancel, not in the way you think, Pooh Bear. No. Most attacks, if not all, can be jumped out of to cancel the end frames of an animation. This isn't a good thing. You're forced to reposition yourself and inconvenience your positioning on the ground and in the air. But you know what? Let's talk about that even further. Jumping saves you in this game because you might as well not block anything pertaining to bosses. Your defensive options are basically stripped away. Bosses spam super attacks and break through guard. There's also this other quirk of the game where most characters kind of just stand in one place when trying to hit an opponent and they never close the distance. It's like range was nerfed in Estival Versus. Many times I felt like whatever weapon one of the girls was using to hit the boss just hit straight air, which is something I didn't have a problem with in Shinobi. Hitboxes feel extremely jank. I don't hear it talked about a lot, but Estival Versus is a very poorly designed action game. There's things it added such as the bombs, the dual aerial rave system, the pouncing wall attacks, and the get up attacks that go straight into an aerial rave, which are honest to God nice additions, but the gameplay is so stiff that it feels like my character freezes in place when I'm trying to move. I don't understand why every single game in this style of the Senran Kagura franchise has this quirk where after you're done running, you just freeze. I had to actively find ways to counteract it. The thing I don't understand is why Estival Versus pumped it to the max. Violations 4, 7, and 16. But this is for Shinobi Versus, not Estival Versus. 4. Does it have interesting level designs? The Muso community does not claim this game, so I'll steal it and treat it with the same respect as our subgenre. The levels are basically open fields where you beat people up. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? The enemies don't really do much and the bosses are super cheap. It's sometimes almost impossible to escape from them once they get going and you have to reposition yourself. 16. Does the game lack enemy variety? Yes. This scores Senran Kagura Shinobi Versus a solid 8.5 out of 10. Shinobi Tenshin! Tier list is getting long like I said before, so I'll move to the review points. I shared some of the points I had to say about it in the other section, so it's fine. Violations 4, 5, 6, 7, and 16. 4. Does it have interesting level designs? Same as before. 5. Does it have a mechanically complex combat system? Like I explained in the Shinobi versus part, Estival versus feels extremely stiff and limiting to the point where it's kind of frustrating. That probably explains why I don't see any videos on it, because people would rather just play the others. Now I know. 6. Is the gameplay based around a gimmick? In this game, the ninja transformations are ridiculously overpowered to the point where you basically have to save them for the perfect moment before the boss uses it. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? I'll take half points, but it's about abusing abilities more than skill itself. 16. Does the game lack enemy variety? Yup, this score Senran Kagura Estival versus a 7.5 out of 10.
こっちこっちじゃない。あんたなんて格好してんのよ。
Senran Kagura Burst Renewal. Positioning in Burst Renewal is extremely important and can utilize the limited combat tools in comparison to the other titles. Honestly, bosses are kind of different in Burst Renewal. I don't specifically know if this is a difficulty difference because I haven't tested it, but there's bosses you can't do infinites on and actually break out of your combos, forcing you to reset to focus on your positioning and timing. Their transformations almost act as a second phase with different timing to parry attacks as well. They're also given super armor that you have to break. It depends on the boss, but the game sort of forces you into a different playstyle from the other ones where you just don't let the bosses breathe, or oftentimes they're unbalanced and don't let you breathe because of poorly implemented mobility. Violations 2, 4, and 7. 2. Does the game have other modes? It does not. 4. Does it have interesting level designs? Same as before. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? While I do think the bosses are better in this game and the overall AI is more aggressive, I can still admit that while I gave it the credit earlier, they're still a bit brain dead. Them being an upgrade doesn't really mean it's still not short one hair. They kind of just do move A, B, or C and wait around to get parried on repeat, so I'll be taking half points. Senran Kagura Burst Renewal scores a solid 9 out of 10. That's it, I'm done for the night, I'm done with this. Sonic Unleashed is an interesting one on this list because it had a bad rap at the time it came out. Now, I can't remember if the whole issue was specifically the Werehog sections or the excessive metal collecting that halts progress, probably both. But the real reason why it's interesting is that Sonic Unleashed is one of those games that people hated back then, but love now. When I was a kid, I used to just love going fast, and that's all I liked in the Sonic games. My favorite animal was a cheetah, for God's sake. As an adult, the fast sections are so janky to the point where they're almost unenjoyable. While I like the Werehog sections now, and that's the part we're focusing on, Sonic Unleashed is another one of those obscure God of War clones that you would have never realized as a God of War clone if you didn't unlock your first sentient thought as a kid. It'll go over your head where they took a majority of inspiration from. The combat in the Werehog sections is arguably among the best of the God of War clones, discounting Ghost Rider and Castlevania Lords of Shadow. Between those, it's like a third best so far from what I've played, but that's not knocking it by any means. Being up there with those games in terms of combat depth should be considered an honor in itself. That DNA runs deep, even in the guard cancel tech. There's a lot of variety in combos. The juggle game in this title is sick. I'm mad at younger me for giving the Werehog section so much flack because, to be honest, I like them more than the Gotta Go Fast section. Yeah, I said it! I won't be taking it back until I have dementia. Violation 7 and 16. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? Sadly, all bosses in the game are gimmick bosses like the rest of the Sonic franchise. 16. Does the game lack enemy variety? Very much so. Sonic Unleashed scores a solid 8.75 out of 10.
If you played nice, I wouldn't have to break all your toys.
Gotcha!
What?
Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions. This game was so goofy. It actually felt like one of those Spider-Man comics you pick up as a kid, but the story isn't that great. But it's also memorable just because you got to see all the Spider-Man teaming up. I'll just skip to the violations because I think I'll be able to say what I have to say better. Violations 2, 5, and 7. 2. Does the game have other modes? It does not. 5. Does it have a mechanically complex combat system? It does not. I'm Gonna put the abilities on screen though. It does actually have a lot of moves, but they don't string into each other, which is the main reason for the point being taken. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? I can't name a single boss in this game that wasn't a gimmick. And what's with Activision and their obsession with guns that whittle your health down by 50% because a room is full of people with assault rifles from 2010 to 2013, because that was getting so annoying. This scores Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions a 7.75 out of 10.
See if you can subdue these opponents silently, with stealth attacks.
You read my mind, sister.
Yes, that's what I do.
Spider-Man Edge of Time. I think this game manages to be less complex than its prequel. Side note, Peter in this game is such an asshole, jeez. Another side note, I feel like you can tell this game wasn't handled by the same team. If I'm wrong though. I'll look it up eventually. I don't really know what to say other than to go to the violations again. Violations 5, 6, and 7. 5. Does it have a mechanically complex combat system? Same as before. 6. Is the gameplay based around a gimmick? So, Peter and Miguel have these abilities that are basically get out of jail free cards that you're supposed to use sparingly, but the entire game is predicated on those abilities. Peter does this thing where he becomes impervious / intangible to damage and objects, and Miguel has this electric decoy that he places to distract enemies. You're forced to use them at every convenience or inconvenience. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? Same as before, but arguably worse in terms of gimmicks. I'll also add the fact that Edge of Time actually has a lack of bosses to begin with. This scores Spider-Man Edge of Time a 7.5 out of 10.
We have almost no time.
Time until what?
Until you're killed.
Until I'm what now? Because it kind of sounded like you said kill.
Star Wars The Force Unleashed makes me wish the third part of the trilogy was just this. Luke being a good-natured fellow who learns to become a Jedi and takes down the Empire. Anakin being the chosen one who fell from grace and became a Sith. Then you have Starkiller here, who is someone on the road to becoming a Sith, but decides that everything he did was wrong, so he aligns with the Jedi. That's such a contrast to the other stories, but at the same time it feels like a missing puzzle piece that we needed to see explored in theaters, but that's enough of that. Was the combat anything to write home about? It has some kinks, but it was tolerable. Not deep by any means, but satisfying when you pull stuff off. It gets super repetitive after a while, but I will say that the CAG-light aspects of this game was faithful, and I'll make some comparisons later. But to elaborate on the kinks, the enemies stun lock you for half your HP. Some areas are a bit overtuned to the point where they throw too much at you. The Force, when it comes to gripping things, can be extremely unresponsive. Sometimes Starkiller will grip something of insignificance in a boss fight where your main way of doing damage to them is, for example, striking them with Force Lightning and then picking them up with the Force to slam them up against the wall or out of the arena. Combat isn't deep, but it's fairly fun. Enemies sometimes adapt to your attacks. I made the mistake of thinking that humanoid bosses couldn't be launched, but oh boy was I surprised that when you actually figure out the puzzle, you can slam them back down to the ground for a finisher stab. Funnily enough, while I don't believe you'll hear this from anyone who's ever written a review for The Force Unleashed, but I noticed that some bosses have a different ragdoll timer value. Like, I could be wrong, but I did notice that some of them will stay down way longer than others. I could get one finisher stab on some and then like 3 on the others. Slowly but surely, after getting stuck on one boss, I did end up watching someone else's gameplay to figure out what to do. Like I mentioned earlier, humanoid bosses have different behavioral patterns. So some of them are weak to something and then the others are weak to something else. Not like Kryptonite, it's more of a, you're not great at handling defending low kicks, huh? Type of things. Enemies are a bit unbalanced. You need a whole lot of cheese to beat them, and what makes it even worse is when the enemy is so OP that you have to cheese them, but they're surrounded by other enemies that you also have to cheese. Come on, bro. That could have been fine-tuned a bit, but you can tell that they really wanted whoever was playing this to really work towards that ending. They get really cheap hits on you after you should be rewarded for landing attacks that have stun properties and give you the advantage. The game lacks canceling options. I've done research and saw that there's tech for it, but I wanted to play the game like I was blind. When you hit someone, the game will force you to overcommit and animation locks you. So hypothetically, if you're fighting a big enemy with a ground pound maneuver, 7 out of 10 times you'll probably get hit by it because you can't jump cancel to dodge it. I found that enemies like that are best dealt with by somehow prolonging your visit in the air so that the AI has trouble touching you while it decides to do a 50-50 where it detects that if you're airborne, or it'll just go back to its regularly scheduled programming by doing the autism spectrum cha-cha slide without the other foot. Love my autistic brothers and sisters out there, you rock! Violations 5, 7, and 16. 5. Does it have a mechanically complex combat system? I actually couldn't wait to explain this because I didn't realize it until I started typing up the script. So the Force Unleashed is like God of War, which I already knew, but the combos kind of operate like Ninja Gaiden. The way to do the aerial dive move is actually almost exactly like how you do the Azuna drop from Ninja Gaiden, but other than that, the combat doesn't really get any deeper than a couple strings and keeping the enemy in a stagger animation to keep them standing when they're actually dead. At least I acknowledge that tech, but even Ninja Gaiden has a ton of tech that you can utilize. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? I'm taking half points for this, which I'll explain later. Most enemies are extremely gimmicky in the sense that their power lies in overwhelming you in numbers, or you're not meant to be 1 foot in front of them. You have to keep them stun locked and get a few hits in, then walk away. As for the bosses, they're more focused around having a specific weakness that you have to solve a minor puzzle for. One of those, oh, that's how you damage them type of games, but at least it makes you think. 16. Does the game lack enemy variety? Yup. Well, there are actually a decent amount. Most of them are just stormtroopers with more HP. I love fighting the enemies with lightsabers though. This scores Star Wars The Force Unleashed a solid 8.25 out of 10.
You are Vader's slave, but your power is wasted with him. You could be so much more.
Star Wars The Force Unleashed 2. So I'm not going to waste any time on this one. It's a bit more fluid, but it's honestly the same game. The only difference is that it has another mode unlike the first game. The only thing I'll say is that the bosses in this game are not good. They're actually non-existent until the end. It makes me give the first game credit for its lackluster roster of bosses. Violations 5, 7, and 16.
I will do your bidding.
Just let her go.
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutants in Manhattan. So this is the very last Platinum Games delisted title for this tier list. I'll be honest, do I think the game is bad? No. Do I think the game is for me? No. It's a bit too basic for my liking, so I'll just hurry up with this section. 2. Does the game have other modes? Nope. 4. Does it have interesting level designs? It's like a hodgepodge of ideas for the sake of ideas being incorporated into a game for minor dopamine rushes curated for an 8-year-old. Was it necessary for me to pull out my mental dictionary? No. It sure as hell got the point across though, didn't it? 5. Does it have a mechanically complex combat system? It has a launcher and character switching, but to act as if the movesets for each turtle has some nuance to it to understand would be disingenuous to say the least. Is a normie doing it? No, but this is me you're talking to. If we were to have a one-on-one conversation about what game is super intensive when it comes to combos, I can guarantee that no one will say Mutants in Manhattan. I'm glad that they have the mechanics they do have in it, but the name of this video is Stylish Action Tier List Part 2. We gotta score these based on the amount of player expression we're allowed, right? Wanna hear something funny? I don't think the tutorial covers the launcher. That's basically who they expect to play their games, and it's kinda sad. I don't like bringing up other games when one is the main focus, but at this point in time when Mutants in Manhattan came out, games were getting a bit dumbed down in the action department, so they didn't even incorporate the basic feature in the tutorial. It's a secret move. If I'm wrong, please correct me. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? Nah, not really. And the bosses were very damage spongy. 16. Does the game lack enemy variety? Yeah, but you can kind of expect that in a Ninja Turtle game, the Foot and the Krang, you know? 18. Is the game littered with fetch quest and lazy quest design? Depending on the mission you play, there's a lot of running back and forth doing minor mini games. This scores Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutants in Manhattan a fairly low 6.25 out of 10.
Yeah, I'd like to order 2,000 extra large cheese and pepperoni specials and 5,000 orders of breadsticks for pickup, please.
The Legend of Korra had me surprisingly hooked. I didn't want to put the controller down. The more I played, the deeper the combat system kept getting. The game was repetitive, but that only gave me more time to test out the combo I dropped on the last thug more often. Something I didn't expect, which I feel like I should have because it was kind of obvious, was that this game has style switching, but it's bending, switching. By the end of the game, I was sort of getting the hang of it. I don't really have much to say. It was a fairly decent game, so we'll move to Violations. Violations 2, 6, 7, and 16. Does 2. Motherfucker. 2. Does the game have other modes? Nope. 6. Is the gameplay based around a gimmick? The counter that they give Korra kind of trivializes most combat encounters, despite the combat being able to be approached on a much deeper level than what's presented. If it weren't for the fact that bigger enemies literally need to be countered, I would take the full point, so we'll take half. 7. Does it have enticing enemies in boss fights, which test your skills? A lot of them are very gimmicky, especially the last boss. My God! 16. Does the game lack enemy variety? Absolutely. It's a pretty short game, all things considered. This lands The Legend of Korra at a solid 8.75.
To knock some heads and get some answers. I gotta get my bending back.
Wet. You can't give Vanquish its flowers without bringing up Wet first, which is funny because I'm pretty sure I did that in the first part. They share a lot of similarities. Slowing down time, the flippy hoo-ha stuff and all that. It came out first and it's still dope, like Vanquish, to this day. Here's a game that's proof I'm not giving good scores to games I love because I love Wet. These scores aren't even my opinion anyway. Violations 5, 6, 7, and 16. 5. Does it have a mechanically complex combat system? Nope. Interestingly enough, you can buy moves and upgrades like in DMC after every mission. 6. Is the gameplay based around a gimmick? The entire game is based around the slow down time effect. The subgenre of games like these are called bullet time, by the way. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? There's like 3 to 6 enemy types in the game. All the bosses are gimmicky and the final stretch is kind of ruined by the next violation covers that. 8. Is the game littered with too many quick time events? It can get excessive and it's way more forgivable than a game like Asura's Wrath, but the final stretch is an entire quick time event with no gameplay, so we'll take half points. 16. Does the game lack enemy variety? Absolutely. This score is Wet a 6.5 out of 10.
Don't be shy, bitch!
X-Men Origins Wolverine. The more you play this game, the cooler it gets. The enemies are a bit unbalanced, but I like a challenge that's doable, so I won't complain. A plus about a game when you're playing it is being able to learn new things to string together as time goes on. I felt like that's exactly what was happening. There's actually a lot of combinations when it came to making combos, to the point where it really does seem like the team really cared about the combat. You're offered a variety of options, and when one doesn't work, you have other moves in your arsenal that may. You're secretly advocated to try different button combinations. Violation 7. 7. Does it have enticing enemies and boss fights which test your skills? Most of the bosses in this game were gimmick bosses that are trivialized by the fact your bouncing ability is just meant to be timed at the right part of their animation to get free damage. And they litter the game with these bosses like they're super proud of them. It got old and annoying after the second time fighting it. Aside from that, the other bosses are okay. I'll take half points for this because the enemies are actually more engaging than the bosses. This scores X-Men Origins Wolverine a solid 9.5 out of 10.
I heal up just like you. Do you even know how to kill me?
I'm gonna cut your goddamn head off to start. See if that works.
Yaiba Ninja Gaiden Z. Where do I start? As I've been making these videos, I've come to the realization that I shouldn't really be ranting per se, but to be honest, it's fair to give my assessment before I actually factually state the glaring issues of the game based on the review points, right? I don't like coming off like I'm complaining, but I'll say it. This game is terrible. Like, people said this game sucked. It was way worse than I thought it could be. The enemies were unbalanced, they're tanky as hell, janky platforming sections if you even want to call them that, an overabundance of making you fight multiple mini bosses at the same time that are health sponges. Enemies lack any charm to them, and the game knows how BS it is because it'll throw you in impossible sections with an overpowered weapon just for that area in particular to deal with the swarm. They know! And as the game goes on, it gets worse and worse and worse and worse with the health sponge enemies. Every single enemy basically turns into a mini boss. And yes, they will throw 25 at you at the same time. Yes, they will throw 4 types at you at the same time as well. Yes, this game is very button mashy. Which is funny because I don't like to use the term button mash because you're in control of the buttons you press, which is why I don't like when people refer to our games like that. But in rare cases, it actually applies. For Yaiba, it's basically smack X or square depending on which controller you're using all day. I don't believe this game was play tested at all. If you ever claim that this game was proof that Team Ninja didn't care about Ninja Gaiden, I wouldn't even try to fight you on it. They kind of do. But violations 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 16. 4. Does it have interesting level designs? No, it throws you into a pit of mini bosses all the time, and the platforming sections felt like someone needed to test the timing on jumps because at times, it honestly felt like the window you're given to do the action is too tight. 5. Does it have a mechanically complex combat system? Absolutely not. Press X or square to win and steal the weapon the mini boss drops for more damage. 6. Is the gameplay based around a gimmick? So I basically kind of said this earlier, the game will constantly throw mini bosses at you, right? What Yaiba advocates is that you pick up the weapon the mini boss drops. These do way more damage than your initial swings of the sword. So if you want to kill the mini bosses faster, pick up the weapon they drop and use it to do way more damage to the next mini boss. It's a very rinse and repeat cycle that doesn't allow for player expression. The entire game is a kill the mini boss while the other is also trying to get me so that I get my get out of jail free card. 7. I ran out of music, bro. I'm gonna just loop this. I don't feel like looking for more. 7. Does it have enticing enemies in boss fights which test your skills? No, enemies don't test your skill in this game. They test your patience because of how long it takes for them to die. 8. Is the game littered with too many QuickTime events? The entire game is basically a QuickTime event. 16. Does the game lack enemy variety? Absolutely. This scores Yaiba Ninja Gaiden Z a 6 out of 10.
Nice gimps, Hayabusa. Where's your ball gag?
And that concludes the second part. Will I make a part 3? I don't plan on it. This tier list destroyed me mentally. The amount of research, sleepless nights, and countless times spent playing video games was abhorrent. I don't ever want to do this again. I hope you guys enjoyed this though. While I'm not planning on doing another one of these, if I were to do a part 3, the next one will be based around action RPGs. I'm not saying it will happen, but don't rule it out. I mean, I have to complete the set, right? You can't not make a part 3, right? When you think about it, it makes sense. That's actually every single game I'm missing. But aside from that, if I don't have a game on here that you guys were hoping I would cover, I apologize. But I think it's fair to say that if you have a suggestion for a game to be added, I already have it. Some of you don't know who I am, but for the ones who do, they know I know. I have fully written reviews for games that I just didn't bother putting in this video. You know why? Because I'm done. For my own mental health and the future of this channel, I had to stop because this tier list would have effectively killed my joy for video games, and I barely have that now. I got to a point where I wouldn't play anything for 2 weeks and I would force myself to pick up the controller to get the video done. Like, I despised playing video games. And for the future of this channel, I don't want that to happen. So part 3 is not in my head right now, and I need to take a step back, take healthy mental breaks so that I'm not damaging my ability to do enthusiastic breakdowns of new releases, to constructively engage with fans of the subgenre and with newcomers. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here to be level-headed individuals who discuss topics about stylish action games. It never will be that serious to me that a game doesn't do A or B, X, and Y. What's important to me is the passion you guys have for this subgenre. I could care less about your opinion. I could care less about my opinion. What matters to me is that you found something in life that you enjoy. Maybe we agree, maybe we disagree, but that is the beauty of video games. Everyone has different tastes, and on this channel, we embrace that. Maybe you think something is good, maybe you think something is bad, but I personally don't view things that way. Good and bad is cool and all, but we discuss these mechanics to offer constructive criticism in an attempt to improve and warrant further discussion. I'm not here to spread an agenda, and I hope that each and every single one of these games brings you some sort of joy. I mean that wholeheartedly. Some of us use these games as an escape from the outside world. That's fine. Some of us like sharing our passion with others because we find solace in the fact that there are other people like us. We play these games to kindle joy in ourselves, so we like spreading that to other people. So I'll be damned if my mental state wanes and I disrespect the hard work these developers put into their games when I make a review. If I lose the ability to think rationally and succumb to emotion, you have effectively lost SP. Thank you for sticking around this long. I thank each and every single one of you that tunes in, takes the time to like, comment, subscribe, ringing the bell notification, each and every single one of you. I appreciate you. I truly mean that. It means a lot. I hope you guys are doing amazing. Whatever you're working on, stay at it, keep it up. Look at how many views my first video got in around 3 months. We've come so far. I hope you guys have a fantastic year. SP invades the world. Final Fantasy 16. Firstly, this is the first game on the tier list that starts with the letter F. No, I'm being serious. Like, go back and look if you want. You know how I said Nier Replicant was the last one I added to the tier list? Now, that's not true. I was originally done with the tier list, but I did tell myself prior to the technical last render that if I was to add one last game, it'd be Final Fantasy 16. Wow. This game is extremely long. Whose idea was it to make this game so lengthy? And they had the nerve to make 2 DLCs. Like, this game is the damn DLC. 38 hours on average. I mean, it's nothing in comparison to Final Fantasy 13 and its 100+ hour average time of completion, but still, is the outside world in the room with us? Aside from my honest gripe being that the game's runtime is a bit too long, which is more of a neutral opinion of course, there's absolutely nothing wrong with long games, but there's ways to make longer titles more enjoyable. Final Fantasy 16 just tends to fall short in the RPG aspect to make the length justified. My positive opinion is that this game was utter flames. I will not deny that. It was a slog to get through, but it was exciting. So it balanced it out. Now, I see why it's talked so highly of. I'll address the elephant in the room. I mean, I'll have to address 3 if we're including Final Fantasy 13 Part 3 and Final Fantasy 14, but I'll keep it on track. It's clear that Final Fantasy hasn't been itself for a while. The switch to real-time combat has turned off many longtime fans due to the dismissal of the semi-turn-based action the titles were known for, being replaced by real-time combat with cooldown abilities. Fundamentally, it's the same thing. Or well, those things are still implemented, but this time we have a basic attack that operates independently from any time-based system. So it's basically Final Fantasy 15 on crack. You can definitely tell the combat director from Devil May Cry worked on this game. Enemy step, a complete juggling system, style switching in a sense, devil trigger, and you name it. The only thing it's missing is a style meter. It obviously doesn't need one, like I've said in prior videos, but not every action game has to be DMC. The boss battles are pretty good. If I had to give a critique about them, they feel like more of a battle of attrition than anything. That's something normally reserved for JRPGs after you're done farming. So in other words, the bosses are a bit too spongy. I mean, they're paced pretty nicely because they normally have like 2 to 3 phases, but they're still fairly well crafted. My only wish is that if you can fully stagger humane bosses, it would be nice to have the ability to launch and juggle them. Oh yeah, that's right, no ladies and 100% gentlemen, the stagger meter is back. I imagine on the hardest difficulty the bosses get even better, which I might try, but that's a huge maybe because this game took me 36+ hours to beat. Aside from skipping cutscenes, I can't even imagine how you could possibly even speedrun the game. I believe it's great, it just overstates its welcome a bit. The thing that I have to give them credit for is that the story keeps you intrigued enough to want to keep playing. So, touche, Square Enix. So, what do the review points say? Many of you are probably assuming that I'll apply Violation 5, but I want to tackle something a bit different this time. This is the first time you'll actually hear me do this. I want to correct the review point people throw at this game. They always say that the combat isn't deep or it doesn't have any complexity. I want to challenge that. Not to be a contrarian, but to actually give a solid answer. Since it's a thing in the community where people will give a sly comment about enemies not fighting back for 30 seconds after being launched in the air, then how's the enemy design? The game on base difficulty is fairly easy. If the argument that you believe to be true is that the depth of a game's combat is based on enemy design alone, then just play it on Final Fantasy, the hardest difficulty. Some even say that the worth of a game's combat system shows on its hardest difficulty. Some say it's the real game. It's very easy to die and enemies don't just wait around to hit you one at a time. As for the combos, since this is a stylish action tier list, we have to rank the stylish action elements. How are the combos? There's actually some variety. You have to keep track of your enemy's hit states and what moves have certain properties to manipulate that hit state. Even your pet wolf Torble has very specific moves you need to use during combos to manipulate the state of the enemy. Hit him up, hit him down, keep him in the air. The elements you can switch between acts is this game's version of style switching. And if that doesn't sound too bad, you have to juggle through them like Dante's weapons. So make sure you have the right one equipped and memorize their placements at all times during a combo. Multiple follow-ups to keep them juggled. So 5, does it have a mechanically complex combat system? I got you just now, didn't I? How many of you just stood up right now? I'm gonna do something different this time. Let's talk about why Violation 5 doesn't apply. For anyone that's watching who hasn't played Final Fantasy 16, you'll probably be surprised after I made all of those comparisons to Devil May Cry. While there is way more that goes into it before I explain, I'm not denying that there's some nuance to the combat system in a bit of depth. But even the most skilled players will tell you that the combat isn't deep. But if you're a DMC player saying that, then no other combat system is deep to you. I'll give you an example to best portray the depth of the combat system of Final Fantasy 16. Torgal, the wolf, launches the enemy into the air. Press circle or B, which teleports you to the launched enemy. It's also tied to the flame ability. Maybe you'll do an air string in this case. To maximize damage, you can also jump cancel if you'd like to continue with the air string. What next? Now in order to continue this combo, I'll switch to my other element by pressing L2 or LT depending on what controller you're using. This allows me to move onto other abilities that have air properties as well. I use the best ability at the moment, Garuda abilities. I continue with the next, enemy goes flying. But let's circle back. Let's do the beginning portion. But before transitioning into the second element, we'll do a Helm Breaker move. This can be tight sometimes, but on the way down, hold triangle or Y, depending on the controller you're using, for a charge shot that you'll time to be fully charged on landing. Boom. Enemy gets relaunched. Press circle or B, chase after them, resume normal traffic flow like usual. Same combo as before, but now we're on a different element like last time. This element allows you to grab smaller enemies and bring them towards you that don't have a stagger meter with circle or B. In that small window of time while the animation is playing and you grabbing the enemy, you will switch the elements twice to circle back to fire. You use the next ability on the flame element to continue the combo. While that animation is playing out, you have time to switch back to the wind element to grab the enemy again. The enemy is a little off kilter, but the game still recognizes that we're in its hurt box, so we're allowed to do a jump cancel combo. Downward slash again. On the way down, hold down triangle or Y for a charge shot like mentioned prior. Boom. L3 plus R3, which is just pushing down the left and right stick for a limit break to maximize damage, we'll treat this as double trigger, then switch elements one more time to unleash the DPS to end the combo. My bad. There's many more routes in this game that are much more complex than this. I haven't even talked about parrying yet. It's done like in Kingdom Hearts where you have to time your hit with the enemy's hit as opposed to blocking at the right time. I honestly like that better. Parrying with a risk reward system. I'm down. But with that being said, it'd be a crime to take anything away from the game in the combat department. Objectively, it has some fair depth to it if we're thinking about it from a stylish action perspective and an overall action game perspective. Final Fantasy 16 scores a perfect score, 10 out of 10.
Sid, you once told me that you wanted to build a place where people could die on their own terms.
I did.
I've been thinking about that. Why not a place where people can live on their own terms?